Chapter 1 of Wandl the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Zachary Brewstergeis, Greenbelt, Maryland. Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. 1. It's a planet, I said. A little world. How little? Venza demanded. 1/5 the mass of the moon. That's what they've calculated now. And how far is it away? Anita asked. I heard a newscaster say yesterday. Newscasters, Venza broke in scornfully. Say you can take what they tell you about any danger or trouble and cut it in half, and even then you'll be on the gloomy side. See here, Greg Haljan. I'm not giving you newscasters Blair, I retorted. Venza's extravagant vehemence was always refreshing. The Venus girl glared at me. I added, Anita mentioned newscasters. I didn't. Anita was in no mood for smiling. Tell us, Greg. She sat upright and tense, her chin cupped in her hands. Tell us. For a fact, they don't know much about it yet. You can call it a planet, a wanderer. I should say it was a wanderer, Venza exclaimed. Coming from heaven knows where beyond the stars, swimming in here like a comet. They calculated its distance yesterday at some 65 million miles from Earth, I said. It isn't so far beyond the orbit of Mars, coming diagonally and heading very nearly for the sun. But it's not a comet. The thing was indeed inexplicable. For many weeks now, astronomers had been studying it. This was early summer of the year 2070 AD. All of us had recently returned from those extraordinary events I've already recounted, when we came close to losing Johnny Grantline's radiactum treasure on the moon, and our lives as well. My ship, the Planetara, in the astronomical seasons when the Earth, Mars, and Venus were within comfortable traveling distances of each other, had carried mail and passengers from Greater New York to Ferrok-Shan of the Martian Union, and to Grebhar of the Venus Free State. Now it was wrecked on the moon. I had been under-navigating officer of the Planetara. Upon her I had met Anita Prince, whose only living relative, her brother, was among those killed in the struggle with the brigands. Anita and I were soon to marry, we hoped. I was waiting now in Greater New York upon the decision of the line officials regarding another spaceship. Perhaps I would have command of it, since Captain Carter of the Planetara had been killed. It was a month or so before that adventure, April 2070, that this mysterious visitor from interstellar space first appeared upon our astronomical horizon. A little thing at first, a mere unusual dot, a pinpoint on a photoelectric star diagram which should not have been there. It occasioned no comment at the time, save that some thought it might be another planet beyond Pluto, but this was not taken seriously enough to get into the newscasts. None of us had heard about it as late as May, when the Planetara set out on what was to be her final voyage. Presently it was seen that the object could not be a planet of our solar system. Coming in at tremendous speed, it daily changed its aspect, gathering velocity until soon it was not a dot, but a streak on every diagram plate. In a week or so, the thing passed from an astronomical curiosity to an item of public news. And now, early in June, when it had cut through the orbit of Jupiter and was approaching that of Mars, fear was growing. The visitor was a menace. No astronomical body could come among us with a mass as great as 1/5 of the moon without causing trouble. The newscasters, with a ready skill for lurid possibilities, were blaring of all sorts of horrible events impending. I told the girls all I knew of the approaching wanderer. The density was similar to that of Earth. The oncoming velocity and the calculated elements of its orbit now were such that within a few weeks more the new planet would round our sun and presumably head outward again. It would pass within a few million miles of us, causing a disturbance to Earth's orbit, even a change of the inclination of our axis, affecting our tides and our climate. So I've heard, Venza interrupted me. They say that, and then they stop. Why can't a newscaster tell you what is so mysterious? For a very good reason, Venza. Because you can't throw people into a panic. This whole thing up to today has been withheld from the public of Earth and Venus. The Martian Union tried to withhold it, but could not. Every heliogram between the worlds is censored. And still, said Venza sarcastically, you don't tell us what is so mysterious about this wanderer. For one thing, I said, it changes its direction. No normal heavenly body does that. They calculated the elements of its orbit last April. They've done it 20 times since, and every time the projected orbit is different. Just a little at first, but last week the accursed thing actually took a sudden turn, as though it were a spaceship. The girls stared at me. What does that mean? Anita asked. They're beginning to make wild guesses, but we won't go into that. What else is mysterious? Venza demanded. The thing isn't normally visible. Venza shifted her silk-sheathed legs. Don't talk in code. Not normally visible, I repeated. A world 1/5 as large as the moon could be seen plainly by our scopes when well beyond Pluto. It's now between Jupiter and Mars, invisible to the naked eye, of course, but still it's not very far away. I've been out there myself. With instruments, we ought to be able to see its surface, see whether it has land and water, inhabitants perhaps. You should be able to distinguish an object on its surface as large as a city, but you can't. Why not? Asked Anita. Are the clouds too thick? What causes it? They don't even know that, I retorted. There is something abnormal about the light waves coming from it. Not exactly blurred, but a distortion, a fading. It's some abnormality of the light waves. A swift rapping on our door grid interrupted me, and Snap Dean burst in. Hello, everybody! Is it a conference? You look so solemn. He dashed across the room, kissed Venza, pretended that he was about to kiss Anita, and winked at me. He was a dynamic little fellow, small, wiry, red-headed, and freckle-faced, and had been the radio-helio operator of the ill-fated Planetara. He was a perfect match for Venza, for all the millions of miles that separated their native lands. Venza, too, was small and slim, her manner as readily jocular as his. "And where have you been?" Venza demanded. "Me? My private life is my own so far. We're not married yet, since you insist on us going to Grebhar for the ceremony." "Do stop it," protested Anita. "We've been talking of—" "I know very well what you've been talking about. Everybody is. I've got news for you, Greg." He went abruptly solemn and lowered his voice. "Halsey wants to see us right away." I regarded him blankly, and my mind swept back. No more than a few short weeks ago, Detective Colonel Halsey of Divisional Headquarters here in Greater New York had sent for us, and we had been precipitated into the Grantline affair. "Halsey?" I burst out. "Easy, Greg." Snap cast a vague look around Anita's draped apartment. An open window was beside us, leading to a tiny catwalk balcony. It was moonlit now, and 200 feet above the pedestrian viaduct. But Snap continued to frown. "Easy, I tell you. Why shout about Halsey? The air can have ears." Venza moved and closed and sealed the window. "What is it?" I asked, more softly. But Snap was not satisfied. "Anita, do you have a complete isolation barrage for this room?" "Of course I haven't, Snap." "Well, Greg, do you have a detector with you?" I had none. Snap produced his little coil and indicator dial. "It's out of order, but let's see now. Shove over that chair, Greg." He disconnected one of the room's tube lights and contacted with the cathode. It was a makeshift method, but as he dropped to the floor, uncoiling a little length of his wire for an external pickup, we saw that the thing worked. The pointer on the dial face was swaying. "Greg," he muttered, "look at that. Didn't I tell you?" The pointer quivered in positive reaction. An eavesdropping ray was upon us. Anita gasped. "I had no idea." "No, but I did," Snap added softly. No one very close. He and I carried the detector to the length of the hall. The indicator went nearer normal. It must be the other way, I whispered. We went to the moonlit balcony. Way down there on the pedestrian arcade, I said. We'll soon fix that, Snap said. Inside the room, we made connection with the newscaster's blaring voice. Under cover of it, we could talk. Snap gathered us close around him. Halsey has something important, and it's about this interstellar invader. It all connects. His office paged me on a public mirror. I happened to see it at Park Circle 40. When I answered it, Halsey's man wanted me to talk in code. I can't talk in code. I have enough to worry about with the interplanetary helios. Then they sent me to an official booth, where I got examined for positive legal identification, and then they put me on the official split wavelength. After all of which precautions, I was told to be at Halsey's office tonight at midnight, and told a few other things. What? Demanded Venza breathlessly. Only hints. Why take chances by repeating them now? You said he wants me too? I put in. Yes, you and Venza. We've got to get into his office secretly, by the vacuum cylinders. We're to meet a man from his office at the 8th Postal Switch Station. Venza? Anita said sharply. What in the universe can he want with Venza? If she's going, I'm going too. Snap gazed at her and grinned. That sounds like a logical deduction. Naturally he must want you. That's why he said Venza. I'm going, Anita insisted. We left half an hour before midnight. The girls were both in gray with long capes. We took the public monorail into the mid-Manhattan section under the city roof of the business district, and into the 8th Postal Switch Station, where the sleek bronze cylinders came tumbling out of the vacuum ports to be rerouted and dispatched again. A man was on the lookout for us. Daniel Dean and party? Yes, we were ordered here. The detective gazed at the girls and at me. It was 3, Dean. And now it's 4, said Snap cheerfully. The extra one is Miss Anita Prince. Ever heard of her? He had indeed. All right, he said. If you and Haljan say so. We were put into one of the oversized mail cylinders and routed through the tubes like sacks of recorded letters. In 10 minutes, with a thump that knocked the breath out of all of us, we were in the switch rack of Halsey's outer office. We clambered from the cylinder. Our guide led us down one of the gloomy metal corridors. It echoed with our tread. A door lifted. Daniel Dean and party. The guard stood aside. Come in. The door slid down behind us. We advanced into the small blue-lit apartment, steel-lined like a vault. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 2. Colonel Halsey sat at his desk with a few papers before him and a bank of instrument controls at his elbow. He pushed his autophone and mirror grid to one side. Sit down, please. He gave each of us the benefit of a welcoming smile, and his gaze finished upon Anita. I came because you sent for Venza, Anita said quickly. Please, Colonel Halsey, let me stay. I thought whatever you want her for, you might need me too. Quite so, Miss Prince. Perhaps I shall. It seemed that in his mind were many of the thoughts thronging my own, for he added, Haljan, I recall I sent for you like this once before. I hope this may be a more auspicious occasion. So do I, sir. Snap said, We've been afraid hardly to do more than a whisper, but you're insulated here and we're mighty curious. Halsey nodded. I can talk freely to you, and yet I cannot. His gaze went to Venza. It is you in whom I am most interested. Me? You flatter me, Colonel Halsey. She sat gracefully reclining in the metal chair before his desk, seeming small as a child between its big, broad arms. Her long gray skirt had parted to display her shapely, gray satined legs. She had thrown off the hood of her cloak. Her thick black hair was coiled in a knot low at the back of her neck. Her carmine lips bore an alluring smile. It was all instinctive. To this girl from Venus, it came as naturally as she breathed. Halsey's gray eyes twinkled. "Do not look at me quite like that, Miss Venza, or I shall forget what I have to say. You would get the better of me. I'm glad you're not a criminal." "So am I," she declared. "What can I do for you, Colonel Halsey?" His smile faded at once. His glance included us all. "Just this. There is a man here in Greater New York, a Martian, whom they call Set Molo. He has a younger sister, Seta Mika. Have any of you heard of them?" We had not. Halsey went on, slowly now, apparently choosing his words with the greatest care. "There are things that I can tell you, and there are things that I cannot." "Why not?" asked Venza. "My dear, for one thing, if you are going to help me, you can do it best by not knowing too much. For another, I have my orders. This thing concerns the very highest authorities, not only of the USW, but in Ferrok-Shan and Grebhar, too." He paused, but none of us spoke. Then Halsey said quietly, "Well, this Martian and his sister are here now in Greater New York. They have some secret. They are engaged in some activity, and I want to find out what it is. I've picked up only little parts of it." He stopped, and out of the silence Snap said, "If you don't mind, Colonel Halsey, it seems to me you are mostly talking in code." "I'm not, but I'm trying to tell you as little as possible. You, Miss Venza, need only understand this. The Martian, Molo, must be induced to give you some idea of what he is doing here." "And am I to induce him?" Venza asked calmly. "That is my idea." The faint shadow of a smile swept Halsey's thin, intent face. "My dear, you are a girl of Venus. More than that, you have far more than your normal share of wits and brains." It did not make Venza smile. She sat tense now with her dark-eyed gaze fastened on Halsey's face. Anita, equally breathless, reached over and gripped her hand. Then Venza said slowly, "I realize, Colonel Halsey, that this is something vital." "As vital, my child, as it could be." He drew a long breath. "I want you to understand I am doing my duty, doing what seems the best thing, not for you, perhaps, but for the world." I seemed to see into his mind at that moment. He might have been a father sending a daughter into danger. "I need not disguise the danger. I have lost a dozen men." He lighted a cigarette. "I don't seem to be able to frighten you?" "No," she said. And I heard Anita murmur, "Oh, Venza." "But you frighten me," said Snap. "Colonel, look here. You know I'm going to marry this girl very soon." "Yes, I know. You'll have to consider this a sacrifice, a voluntary descent into danger, for a great cause in a great crisis. You four have just come out of a very considerable danger. We know of what stuff you are made, all of you." He smiled again. "Perhaps that prominence is unfortunate for you, but let me settle it now. Is there any one of you who will not take my orders and trust my judgment of what is best? And do it, if need be, blindly? Will you offer yourselves to me?" We gazed at each other. Both the girls instantly murmured, "Yes." "Yes," I said at last. It was not too hard for me, for I thought I was yielding him Venza, not Anita. Snap was very pale. He stared from one to the other of us. "Yes," he said finally. "But, Colonel, surely you can tell us more." Halsey tossed his cigarette away. "I will tell you as much as I think best. These Martians, Molo and his sister, do not know of Venza. At least, I think that they do not. They apparently have not been here very long. How they got here, we don't know. There was no passenger or freight ship. In Ferrok Shan they have a dubious reputation at best, but I won't go into that. Venza, I will show you these Martians, and the rest depends upon you. There is a mystery. You will find out what it is. He reached for his inter-office audiphone. I want to locate the Martian Set Molo. Francis, Staff X2, has it in charge. The audible connection came in a moment. Francis? We could hear the answering microphonic voice. Yes, Colonel. Is the fellow in a public place by any chance? In the Red Spark Cafe, Colonel, with his sister and a party. Good enough. The Red Spark has an image finder. Have you visual connection? Yes, the whole room. They have a dozen finders. Use a magnifier. Get me the closest view you can. It's done, Colonel. I did it just in case you called. Connected. In a moment, our mirror grid was glowing with the 2-foot square image of the interior of the Red Spark Cafe. I knew the place by reputation, a fashionable, more or less disreputable eating, drinking, and dancing restaurant where money and alkylite flowed freely. The patrons were successful criminals of the 3 worlds, intermingled with thrilled, respectable tourists who hoped they would see something really evil. The Red Spark was not far from Halsey's office. It was perched high in a break of the city roof, almost directly over Park Circle 29. There he is, said Halsey. We crowded around his desk. The image showed the interior of a large oval room, balconied and terraced. A dais dance floor, raised high in the center with 3 professional couples gyrating there, and beneath them the public dance grid, slowly rotating on its central axis. 100 or so couples were dancing. The lower floor was crowded with dining tables. Others were upon the little catwalk balconies, and still others in the terraced nooks and side niches, half enshrouded, half revealed by colored draperies. The image now was silent, for Halsey was not bothering with audio connection. But it was a riot of color, flashing colored floodlights bathing the dancers in vivid tints, and there were twinkling spots of colored tube lights on all the tables. I saw, too, the blank rectangles of darkness against the walls which marked the private dining rooms, insulated against sight and sound. Here one might go for frivolous indiscretion, or for conspiracy, perhaps, and be as secure from interruption as we were here in Halsey's office. Venza asked eagerly, "Which is he?" "Over there on the 3rd terrace to the left. That table. There seem to be 6 of them in the party." We heard Francis's voice. He was in Halsey's Lower Manhattan office, with this same image before him. "We'll get a closer view." The table in question was no more than a square inch on our image. We could see an apparently gay party of men and women. One of the couples was gigantic, a Martian man and woman, obviously. The others seemed to be Earth or Venus people. Francis's voice added, "I've got an audio magnifier on them. Foley's been listening for an hour. Nice, clear English. Much good it does us. This fellow is as cautious as a director of the lower air lane. Here's your near look." Our image shifted to another view. The lens eye with which we were connected now gave us a view directly over the Martian's table. We were looking down diagonally upon the table, at a distance of no more than 10 feet. There were 3 Earthwomen in the party. There was nothing peculiar about them. They were rather handsome, dissolute in appearance, all of them obviously befuddled by alkylite. There was a man who could have been Anglo-Saxon, a wastrel probably, with more money than wit. He wore a black dinner suit edged with white. Our attention focused upon the other 2. They were tall, as are all Martians. The young woman, Seta Mika, seemed perhaps 20 or 25 years of age by Earth reckoning, in stature perhaps very nearly my own height, which is 6 feet 2. It is difficult to tell a Martian's age, but she was very handsome, even by Earth standards, and in Ferrok Shan she would be considered a beauty. Her gray-black hair was parted and tied at the back with a plaited metal rope. Her short, dark cloak, so luminous a fabric that it caught and reflected the sheen of all the gaudy restaurant lights, was parted, its ends thrown back over her shoulders. Beneath it she wore the characteristic Martian leather jacket, and short, wide leather trousers ornamented with spun metal fringes and tassels. Most Martian women have an Amazonian aspect, but I saw now that Seta Mika was an exception. Her brother, who sat beside her, was a full 7 feet or more. A hulking sort of fellow, far less spindly than most of his race. He might have come from the polar outposts beyond the Martian Union. He was bareheaded, his gray-black hair clipped close upon a round bullet head with the familiar Martian round eyes. I gazed into the face of Molo, as momentarily he turned his head. It was a rough-hewn, strongly masculine face, with a hawk-like nose, bushy black brows frowning above deep-set round eyes. The face of a keen scoundrel, I could not doubt, though the smooth-plucked gray skin was flushed now with alkalite, and the wide, thin-lipped mouth was leering at the woman across the table from him. Like his sister, he had thrown back his cloak, disclosing a brawny, powerful figure, leather-clad, with a wide belt of dangling ornaments, some of which probably were weapons. How long we gazed at this silent, colored image of the restaurant table, I do not know. I was aware of Halsey's quiet voice. "Look him over, Miss Venza. It depends on you." Another interval passed. It seemed, as we watched, that Molo's interest in his party was very slight. I got the impression, too, that though at first he had seemed to be intoxicated, actually he was not. Nor was his sister. Anxiety seemed upon her. The smile she had for jest seemed forced, and at intervals she would cast a swift, furtive glance across the gay restaurant scene. More drinks arrived. The Earth people at the table here seemed upon the verge of stupor. And suddenly it appeared that Molo had completely lost interest in them. With a gesture to his sister, he abruptly rose from his seat. She joined him. They left the table, and a red-clad floor manager of the restaurant came at their call. Then, in a moment, they were moving across the room. Halsey called sharply into his audiphone. "Francis, hold us to them if you can." They were standing now by the opened door of one of the Red Spark's private insulated rooms. We caught a glimpse of its interior, a gaily set table with a bank of colored lights over it. The figure of a man was in there. He was on his feet, as though he had just arrived to meet the Martians here, and a hooded long cloak enveloped him. It may have been a magnetic, invisible cloak, with the current now off. We caught only the fleetest of impressions before the insulated door closed and barred our vision. The glimpse was an accident. Molo, taken by surprise at this appearance of his visitor, could hardly have guarded against it. The waiting figure was very tall, some 10 feet, and very thin. The hood shrouded his face and head. In his hand he held a large circular box of black shiny leather, of the sort in which women carry wide-brimmed hats. As Molo joined him, he put the box gently on the floor. He handled it as though it were extraordinarily heavy, and as he took a step or two, he seemed weighted down. Just as the room door was hastily closing, Mika sliding it from the inside, we caught a fleeting glimpse of horror. The lid of the hat box had lifted up. Inside was a great round thing of gray-white, a living thing. A distended ball of membrane with a network of veins and blood vessels showing beneath the transparent skin. For the instant we gazed, stricken. The ball was palpitating, breathing. I saw convolutions of inner tissue under the transparent skin of membrane. A little tentacle, like an arm with a flat-webbed hand, was holding up the lid of the box. The lid rose a trifle higher. The colored lights overhead gave us a brief but clear view of it. The thing in the box was a huge living brain. I saw goggling, protruding eyes, an orifice that could have been a nose, and a gash upended for a vertical mouth. It was a face, and the little tentacle arm holding up the box lid was joined to where the ear should have been. Was this something human? A huge, distended human brain, with the body withered to that tiny arm? The palpitating thing sank down into the box and the lid dropped. And upon our horrified gaze, the insulated door of the room slid to. "By the gods," exclaimed Halsey. "One of them dares come to the Red Spark, here, almost in public." So Halsey knew what this meant. His eyes were blazing now. His face was white with an intensity of emotion that transfigured it. "Francis, tell Foley I'll be in the manager's office in 5 minutes." He snapped off. Our image connection with the Red Spark went dead. "We're going to the Red Spark," he announced. "This changes everything, yet I don't know. Venza, I may need you more than ever now." Halsey herded us to the office door. From his desk he had snatched up a few portable instruments, and he flung on a cloak. It was a brief trip to the Red Spark, on foot through the subcellar arcade to where, under Park Circle 29, we went up in a vertical lift to the roof. We were in the side entrance oval of the restaurant in 5 minutes. In the dim metal room of Orentino, the Red Spark's manager, a barrage was up and Foley was waiting for us. We could hear it faintly humming. Now we could talk. Halsey slammed the door down. He said swiftly, "My men caught one of those things this morning. They have it now, and I think Molo does not yet know we captured it. A brain. We're convinced it understands English and can talk, but no one has been able to make it talk yet. Foley, order that damned Orentino to de-insulate the room Molo is in. Now, by the gods, we may see and hear something." The frightened manager of the Red Spark was in the control room. Halsey killed our barrage to let the outside connections get through to us. We all crowded around the mirror grid which stood on Orentino's desk. Foley gave us connection with the control room. We saw Orentino's face, his eyes nearly popping with fright. "Colonel Halsey, I will do whatever you tell me." "What room is that Martian occupying?" "Insulated 39. "Break off the insulation. Do it slowly, and he may not notice. Then give us connection, audio and vision." "But I have no image finders in the insulated rooms." "Cut off the barrage. I'll get connection there." Foley was already setting up his eavesdropper on the desk. The mirror blurred a little, then it clarified. We had the interior of the secret room, and voices were coming out of Foley's tiny receiver. The image showed the box on the floor, with its lid down. The tall, hooded shape of the stranger stood with Molo and his sister by the table. They were talking in swift, vehement undertones. The language was Martian, a dialect principally used in Ferrok-Shan. Our equipment brought it in, and I could understand it. Molo was saying, "But you are the fool to have dared to come here." "The master knows that there is danger. Something is wrong." The hooded stranger spoke like a foreigner, but not a Martian, nor an Earthman, and not like any person of Venus I had ever heard. It was a strange, indescribable intonation, a flat, hollow voice. "I say the master is concerned." "Let him be." "And he demanded I bring him here to find you. He is displeased that you are here." What gruesome thing was this? Their glances seemed to go to the box on the floor at their feet, as though the master were in there. But the lid of the box did not rise. "Well, you have found me," Molo declared impatiently. "When you know me better, always you will find I have my wits. The thing is for tomorrow night, not tonight." "But that, my master is not sure." The hollow voice was deferential, but insistent. "He fears danger. Something has gone wrong. He is working on it now, striving to receive the message. There is a message, he knows that much. Perhaps from our world, Wandl itself. For a moment Molo had no answer. His sister had not spoken. I noticed that her gaze seemed roving the room. "What is it I should do?" Molo asked at last. "Come with us to your home room." "But I have everything ready there. The contact is ready for tomorrow night. Your world will control Earth." "But if it be tonight?" Again Molo was silent. My breath stopped. On our mirror I saw the stranger's hood part just a little. There seemed to be no face, just the blur of something brownish. "But if it be tonight?" the voice insisted. "I will go," Molo said abruptly. "But your coming here was dangerous. Suppose we cannot get out undetected? You know I will never go to where all our instruments are set up and have some damnable spy follow me. Is all going well on Venus and Mars?" "Yes, my master feels so. He seems to get messages. The contacts will be made simultaneously." A gruesome chuckle. "The capture of these 3 worlds. We shall have all 3 enchained at once, helpless." The lid of the black box seemed again about to rise, when there came a sharp cry from Mika. "This room is not insulated!" Our eavesdropping was discovered. Beside me I heard Halsey give a low curse. On our mirror we saw sudden action. The 10-foot cloaked figure laboriously lifted the black box and swung with it toward the outer wall of the room. I saw now clearly with what a dragging, heavy tread that giant-shaped move, as though it weighed, here on Earth, far more than the normal weight to which it was accustomed. "Over there," Molo gasped. "The escape port. This room has one. Mika, go with him. I will join you. You know where." Foley cried, "Colonel, I may be able to stop them." But Halsey saw on our image that Molo was staying. "Wait. Let them go. If we have the Martian here, that's better." I saw the room's escape port swing open as Mika and the hooded shape carrying the box moved for it. The moonlit darkness of the outer catwalk enveloped the disappearing figures. Molo was left alone. He closed the port swiftly. His detector now was in his hand, but Halsey anticipated him by a second or two. Our listener went dead. Our mirror darkened. Doubtless Molo was never sure whether he had been spied on or not. Halsey was on his feet. "Foley, get out into the main room. Stay with him." But there was no need to follow Molo. He had sent his visitor and sister out by the escape port, which was usual enough. Now he was back in the main room, as though nothing of importance had happened, with an appearance of intoxication about him. He wavered jovially across the room, threading his way through the gay diners, and reached the table where his party still sat carousing. Again Halsey shut us off. "He's got a base somewhere in the city. You heard what they said about it. We've got to trick him into going there, unsuspecting." Halsey seized the autophone. "Your chance, Venza. It's the only way. Foley, keep away from that Martian. Shut off all contacts. I'll meet you out there in a moment. I'm sending a girl. She'll go after him." "Now?" Venza asked. "Yes. It's the only way. Perhaps you can get him drinking. Venza, use all the wiles you possess now." "No," gasped Snap. "It's too dangerous." Anita was clinging to Venza. "Colonel Halsey, I'm going too." Halsey stared, then made a swift decision. "Right. That is still better." I jumped to my feet. "Colonel, I should prefer that one of us men—" He gripped me by the shoulders. "Greg Haljan, I take no suggestions from you." His blazing eyes bored into me. "There isn't a second to lose. Don't you realize this means destruction of our 3 inhabited planets? I'll sacrifice myself, you, or these girls. Venza, take Anita outside. I'll join you immediately, give you last instructions. Take a portable autophone with you." He turned to Snap. "This is the only way. These demons can't be forced, you know that. The girls were moving toward the door. I met Snap's anguished gaze. Greg, don't let them go! No. No, I won't. I made a lunge past Halsey, with Snap after me. Halsey did not move, but one of his rays struck us. With all senses numbed, I felt myself falling. Greg, don't let them... Snap had tumbled upon me. My senses did not quite fade. I was aware of Anita's and Venza's horrified cries, but Halsey pushed them toward the door. It slid up. I vaguely saw the two girls going out, with Halsey after them, and the door coming down. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 3. I have no idea how long it was before Halsey came back. Snap and I were seated on a low metal bench against the wall. The effect of the paralyzing ray was wearing off. We were tingling all over, our senses still confused. Halsey stalked in upon us. So you are recovered? Snap stammered. I say, we're sorry as hell we acted like that. I know you are. His voice softened. If I could have done anything else, believe me I would have. But I don't think harm will come to them. They're clever. Are they outside? I asked. Did they find a way of meeting the Martians? How long have you been gone? Halsey merely stared at me as though he had no intention of answering. And then the autophone on the desk buzzed. This is Halsey, he said. Yes, I have them here. Bring them. Did you say bring them? We could not hear the answering voice, for Halsey had the muffler in contact. No, I would prefer not to come. I'm watching something. I'm at the Red Spark Cafe. Well, I'm going back to my office presently to wait there. He continued in code. Like Snap, I had never had occasion to learn it. The words were strange-sounding staccato gibberish. He ended, I will send them, Grantline. Very well, I'll tell them to locate him. At once, yes. He closed off the autophone. Halsey swung on us. You're all right now? Yes. I stood up, drawing Snap up with me. What is wanted of us, Colonel? That's better, Greg. He smiled, but he was still grim. I wanted you here to wait for this call from the Conclave of Public Safety. It met at midnight. They have ordered both of you there. That's a secret meeting, isn't it? Asked Snap. There was no report of it over the air tonight. Yes, secret. He was leading us to the door. They won't need you for more than half an hour. When they finish, come back to my office. You can come openly. He stood with his finger on the door lever. Goodbye, lads. Foley will lead you to the service room. You are to take a mail cylinder for Postal Switch Station 20. They'll reroute you from there to the Conclave Auditorium. The door slid up. When you disembark, he added, ask for Johnny Grantline. You are to sit with him. He showed us out, and the door slid down before him. We trudged the corridor, and Snap gripped me. For myself, he whispered swiftly, I'll go to the damnable conclave because I'm ordered. But I won't stay there long. Once we get out of it, if I don't root myself back to the Red Spark, I'm a motor oiler. I agreed with him. We had a mental picture of Anita and Venza in the Red Spark's public room. Doubtless Orentino had created a way for them to meet Molo. They would sit there in the Red Spark with that drinking party, and in less than an hour we would be back. But as we crossed diagonally across an end of the main room with Foley leading us, we caught a glimpse of Molo's table. The party was still there, but Molo, Anita, and Venza were gone. We had no time to get any information. Foley abruptly left us, and another man took his place. In the service room, a passenger cylinder was waiting. Our guide entered it with us. At the switch station, we had the breath knocked out of us. After another 10 minutes in the vacuum tube, we reached our unknown destination. The cylinder slide opened. We found ourselves with a lone guard, and through a gloomy arcade opening, Johnny Grantline was advancing to greet us. Well, so here you are, Greg. Hell to pay heaven going on here. Come on in, I'll tell you. We were sent for, Snap said. Yes, but they don't want you yet. Come in here. He waved away the guard and led us through a padded arcade into a low-vaulted audience room, windowless and gloomy. Across it, a doorway panel stood ajar. Grantline peered through it. There was the glow of light from the adjoining room and the distant murmur of many voices. Grantline closed the door. Sit down and I'll tell you. Where are we? I asked. The 9th Conclave Hall. I knew its location, Lower Manhattan, high under the city roof. Grantline produced little cigarette cylinders. Steady your nerves, lads. You'll need it. He grinned at us. The hand with which he lighted my cylinder was steady as a tower base, but he was excited. I could see it by the glint in his eyes, and hear it in his voice. What's going on? Snap demanded. It's about this invading planet. By the gods, when you hear what's really been learned about it. Well, what? I asked. He sketched what he had heard this night at the conclave. The mysterious invader was inhabited. How do they know that? Snap put in. Wait, I'll tell you the rest of it. The accursed thing changes its orbit. It banks and turns like a spaceship. It stopped out in space. It's poised out there now between Mars and Jupiter. A world about the 5th the size of the moon, and the beings on it can control its movements. They've brought it in from interstellar space into our solar system. Evidently, the point they've reached now is as far as they want to come. They've poised out there, getting ready to attack, not only us, but Mars and Venus simultaneously. Grantline gazed at us through the smoke of his cigarette. He was much like Snap, small, wiry, brisk of movement and manner, but older. His hair was graying at the temples. His voice carried the authority of one accustomed to commanding men. Don't ask me for the technicalities of how they reached these conclusions. I'm no astronomer. I'm only telling you their conclusions and what their discussions have been here for the past hour. Heaven knows we had no inclination to dispute him. What we had seen and heard at the Red Spark tallied with his words. He went on swiftly. The attack of whatever nature it may be is impending at once. Not next month or next week, but now. Lord, Greg, I don't blame you for staring like that. You don't know what's been going on for the past 2 days on Earth, and Venus and Mars. It's all been suppressed. Neither did I until I heard it here tonight. The USW, the Martian Union, the Venus Free State, all are preparing for war. Every government spaceship on Earth is being commissioned. We're not going to sit around and wait for invaders to land. The war won't be fought on Earth if we can help it. We stared. Snap asked, "What makes them so sure?" That war is coming? Plenty. This new planet has sent out spaceships. The planet itself is hovering 60 million miles away from us, about 40 million miles from Mars, and close to 90 million from Venus. Perhaps its leaders think that's the most strategic spot. Then it sent out spaceships, 3 of them. One is hovering close to Venus, another is near Mars, and the third is some 200,000 miles off Earth. Several of our interplanetary freighters are overdue. It seems now that they must have encountered these invading ships and been destroyed. Still more and worse, these 3 hovering ships have already landed the enemy on Mars and Venus. The Helio reports mention mysterious encounters in Ferrok-Shan and Grebhar. For 3 or 4 days, Mars has been in a panic of apprehension, Venus almost as bad. And some have landed here. Not many, perhaps, but one has been captured. A thing. God, it's almost beyond description. We could well agree with that, since Snap and I had just seen one. They've got it here, Grantline was saying. They've tried to make it talk. They can't, but they're going to try again. He jumped to his feet and went to the door. They're bringing it in. Upon his face was a look of awed horror. We stood crowding the small door oval. It gave onto a darkened balcony of the conclave hall. The girders of the city roof were over us. There were a few official spectators sitting up here in the dark on the balcony, but none noticed us. The lower floor of the hall was lighted. Around the polished oblong tables, perhaps 100 scientists and high governmental officials of the three worlds were seated. Near the center of the hall was a small dais platform. On a table there, someone had just placed a circular black box, similar to the one we had seen previously. The hall was hushed and tense. On the dais stood a group of Earth officials. One of them spoke. "Here it is, gentlemen. And this time, by God, we'll make it speak." Grantline whispered, "That's the War Secretary from Greater London." I recognized him. Brayley, Commander-in-Chief of the Land, Air, Water, and Space Armies of the United States of the World. He was gigantic in stature, with a great shock of gray-white hair. A commanding figure, if there ever was one. Beside him, Nippor, the Japanese representative in Greater New York, seemed a pygmy. The acoustics of the silent hall carried his soft voice up to us. "I would be afraid of drugs. Will we use force? It is vital." "Yes, by God. Anything." It seemed that everyone in the hall must be shuddering. I could feel it like an aura pounding up at me. Brayley lifted the box lid, reached in and raised the horrible thing. He held it up, a 2-foot ball of palpitating gray-white membrane. Another living brain. "Now, damn you, you're going to talk to us. Understand that? We're going to make you talk. Get that box out of the way." They flung the box to the floor, and Brayley placed the brain on the table. A glare of light, focused on it, showed beneath the stretched taut membrane the convolutions of the brain, like tangled purple worms. The blood vessels seemed distended almost to bursting now. The gruesome face, with popping eyes and that gaping mouth, showed a horrible travesty of terror. From where its ears should have been, a crooked little arm of flabby gray-white flesh came down, one on each side, and braced the table. And I saw now that it had a shriveled body, or at least little legs, bent, almost crushed under by its weight. "Now, damn you," Brayley said, rubbing off his hands on a rough towel. "For the last time, will you talk?" The goggling eyes held a terrified but baleful glance upon Brayley's face. Did it understand? The eyes were fronted our way, and suddenly their glance swung up so that I seemed for an instant to see down into them. And it struck me then. This was a thing of greater intelligence than my own. A humanoid, with brains so developed that through myriad generations the body was shriveled, almost gone. A mind was housed here, an intelligence housed in this monstrous brain. Were these the beings of the new planet which had come to attack us? But how could this helpless creature, incapable of almost everything, obviously save thought, do the work of its world? Then I recalled again that insulated room of the Red Spark Cafe, the thin 10-foot hooded shape which was carrying the box. Was that, perhaps, an opposite type of being with the brain submerged, dwarfed, and the body paramount? Were there, on this mysterious planet, two coexisting types, each a specialist, one for the physical work and the other for the mental. I stood with Snap and Grantline in that dark balcony doorway, gazing down to where the giant brain stood braced upon its shriveled arms and legs, and realized why we of Earth and Venus and Mars are all cast in the same mold we call human. It is a little family of planets here in our solar system. For countless eons we have been close neighbors. The same sunlight, the same general conditions of life, the same seed, were strewn here by a wise creator. A man from the Orient is different from an Anglo-Saxon. A man of Mars differs a little more. But basically, they are the same. Yet confronting us now was a new type, from realms of interstellar space, far beyond our solar system. "For the last time, will you talk?" snapped Brayley. There was another interval of silence. The eyes of the brain were very watchful. Its gaze roved the hall as though it were seeking for help. It shifted its little arms on the table, seemingly exhausted from the physical effort of supporting itself. Brayley's voice came again. "Doubtless you can feel pain acutely. We shall see." With what effort of will to overcome his revulsion we may only guess, he reached forward and pinched the little arm. The result was electrifying. From the upended slit of mouth in that goggling face came a scream. It pierced the heavy tense silence of the hall, ghastly in its timbre, like nothing any of us had ever heard before. And in it was conveyed agony as though Brayley had not merely pinched that flabby arm, but had thrust a red-hot knife into its vitals. The brain could feel pain indeed. It crouched with stiffened arms and legs. The membrane of its great head seemed to bulge with greater distension. The knotted blood vessels were gorged with purple blood. The eyes rolled. Then it closed its mouth. Its gaze steadied upon Brayley's face, so baleful a gaze that as I could see the reflection of its luminous purple glow, a shudder of fear and revulsion swept me. "So, you did not like that?" Brayley steadied his voice. "If you don't want more, you had better speak. How did you get here on Earth? What are you trying to do here?" There seemed an interminable silence. Then Nippur took a menacing step forward. "Speak. We will force it from you." And then it spoke. "Do not touch me again." Indescribable voice. Human, animal, or monster, no one could say. But the words were clear, precise, and for all their terror, they seemed to hold an infinite command. A wave of excitement swept the hall, but Brayley's gesture silenced it. He leaped forward and bent low over the palpitating brain. "So you can talk. You came as an enemy. We have given you every chance today for friendship, and you have refused. What are you trying to do to us?" It only glared. "Speak!" "I will not tell you anything." "Oh, yes, you will." "No." All the men on the platform were crowding close to it now. "Speak!" ordered Brayley again. "Here in Greater New York is a hiding place. Where is it?" No answer. "Where is it? You are perhaps a leader of your world. I lead ours, and I'm going to master you now. Where is this hiding place?" The thing suddenly laughed, a gruesome, eerie cackle. "You will know when it is too late. I think it is too late already." "Too late for what?" "To save your world. Doomed your 3 worlds. Don't touch me!" It ended with a scream of apprehension as Nippor grasped the crooked little arm. "Tell us!" "No!" it screamed again. "Let me go!" "Tell us!" Nippor strengthened his squeezing grip. The thing was writhing, the thin ball of membrane palpitating, heaving. And suddenly it burst. Over all its purpled surface, blood came with a gush. Nippor and Brayley staggered backward. The scream of the brain ended in a choking gurgle. The little legs and tiny body wilted under it. The round ball of membrane sank to the table. It rolled sidewise upon one arm and ear, and in a moment its palpitations ceased. A purple-red mass of blood, it lay defeated and flabby. It was dead. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 4. "But see here," I said. "Did they mention the Martian, Molo, at all?" "They were discussing Molo before you arrived," Grantline told us. We had drawn back from the doorway. The conference, with the dead thing removed, was proceeding. Snap and I had momentarily forgotten Anita and Venza, but now we were in a panic to get back to the Red Spark. "But you can't go," said Grantline. "Brayley ordered you here. He'll want to see you in a moment." "Well, why doesn't he see us now?" Snap protested. "I'm not going to cool myself off sitting here." "Oh, yes, you are." Grantline sent word to Brayley that we were here. In a moment, the answer came. We were to wait a short time. He would want to see us. We swiftly told Grantline what had happened at the Red Spark, and found that already he knew. Francis had relayed it to the conference, and Halsey was in constant communication with the officials here. "Then what is happening?" I demanded. "Where are the girls? Has Halsey heard from them?" Again, Grantline went to a nearby room. "Anita sent a message," he said when he returned. "They are with Molo. Halsey is ordering a squad of men to be ready." Grantline told us what had been happening in the Red Spark. Anita and Venza, simulating drunkenness with a skill for acting which I knew both of them possessed, had joined Molo's party. Perhaps if Mika had been there, she would have seen through them. But Molo did not. And they have since told me that the Martian himself was far from sober, although he was probably not aware of it. He yielded to their demands to leave the restaurant with him. He wanted, as we know, to leave unobtrusively, and Venza threatened a scene unless she could go. He took them, leaving openly in a public fare car. Doubtless he at first intended to derail them somewhere, but they convinced him that he was not being followed. Twice he used his detector, and Anita and Halsey were clever enough to throw off their rays in time to avoid it. Then Halsey lost connection with the fleeing car, and after that Molo changed his mind about ditching the girls. "But where are they now?" I demanded. "You," said Grantline sternly, "are out of it. Do you think that Halsey, under Brayley's orders, will neglect any chance to find out where Molo is hiding? Something is about to happen. This conference is wrestling with it. In Grebhar and Ferrok Shan they're striving to find out what it is. Something impending now. Helios are pouring in here from Venus and Mars. They're mobilizing their spaceships, just as we are." Grantline was at last letting out all his apprehensions on us with this burst. "Halsey didn't tell you that the entire resources of his organization are out upon this thing tonight. Here at this conclave there's a room of information sorters. That's just where I came from a moment ago. Every country on our Earth is making ready. For what? Nobody knows." He's had 2 fragmentary calls from Anita.
He has 100 men ready to rush to their aid and to capture Molo's lair. He expects another message from Anita any moment. This conference here knows every movement that is being made within 10 or 20 seconds of its making. Perhaps upon Anita and Venza the whole outcome of this thing may hang. We had no answer to that. Do you know who Molo is? He's an interplanetary pirate. His ship is the Star Streak. Good Lord. We had heard of him. For 5 years past, a gray spaceship with a base supposedly hidden in the polar deserts of Mars had been terrorizing interplanetary shipping. They think, Grantline went on, that Molo was cruising with his pirate ship. He has, as you know, a band of criminals drawn from all 3 worlds. There are about 50 of them, commanded by his sister and himself. We think that Molo encountered the 3 ships which that new planet sent out. The Star Streak was captured, perhaps destroyed. Molo and his band joined with this new enemy to save themselves, and because they have been promised rewards. But why should these brains want their help? Snap demanded. Wouldn't you say it was because in Ferrok-Shan, Grebhar, and here in Greater New York, simultaneously tonight, something has to be accomplished, something the brains themselves could not do? Molo and his band know all 3 cities. How they landed here in Greater New York, nobody knows. The enemy spaceship is 200,000 miles out. Obviously they came from it, landed secretly with some smaller ship somewhere on Earth, and made their way here. A buzzer sounded beside us. A voice commanded, "Grantline, bring Greg Haljan and Daniel Dean to room 6 at once." In room 6 we stood before the War Secretary, who had arrived there a moment ahead of us. "Ah, Haljan and Dean, I'm glad to see you." He was still white and shaken. Beads of perspiration stood upon his forehead. He mopped them off. "I've just had a rather terrible experience." He did not suggest that we sit down. He went on crisply, "Grantline no doubt has told you of what's going on. Disturbing. Terrifying. Haljan, we have a ship being rushed into commission tonight. You know her, the Commotara?" "I know her," I said. "Quite so. She is taking off as soon as we can ready her. She will carry about 50 men. Grantline is in charge of the armament and men. You, Dean, we want to handle her radio helio." "Right," said Snap. "And you, Haljan, we can think of no one better to navigate her." He waved away my appreciation. "Within a brief time we shall have 30 such ships in space. Mars and Venus also are mobilizing." He stood up. "We feel, Haljan, that if anyone can handle the Commotara with skill enough to combat this lurking enemy, it will be you." "I'll do my best, sir." "We know that. The ship is leaving from the Tappan interplanetary stage shortly after dawn. When have you and Dean last slept?" "Last night," we both said. "Quite so. Then you need sleep now. I want you to go at once to the Tappan field house. The commander there will make you comfortable. Eat and sleep if you can. We want you in good shape. You're to keep out of this night's activities here in the city. You understand?" "Yes, sir." An orderly was approaching behind Brayley. "I'll be back in a moment, Rollins." He shook hands with us. "I may not see you again before it's over. Good luck, lads. Grantline, they need you for a moment in the hall, something about electronic space weapons, further equipment for the Commotara. Then you'd better go to Tappan House too, and get some sleep." We were dismissed. Snap and I regarded each other hesitantly. I said impulsively, "Mr. Brayley, Detective Colonel Halsey is using 2 girls." "Yes, we're watching that, Haljan." "They're the girls we're to marry," I added. "May we communicate with Colonel Halsey?" "Yes. Call him from here." He smiled wanly. "But keep out of it. We need you at dawn." The Tappan departure stage was only a few miles up the Hudson. We could get there in half an hour. It was now nearly tri-night, halfway between midnight and dawn. I had my portable autophone and got Halsey at once. "You Greg?" "Yes. They're through with us at the conclave. Where is Anita?" "We heard from her twice. I'm expecting—" We could hear someone interrupting him. Then he came back. "Greg, Molo took them somewhere. I didn't dare fling after them. He had his detector going, and Anita warned me not to try it. She had to stop connection herself. God knows how she was able to whisper me at all." His voice, like Brayley's, had the ring of a man strained to the breaking point. I could appreciate how Halsey must feel, forced to remain at his desk with its encircling banks of instruments, holding all the network of his far-flung activities centralized, his decisions, his commands in 100 places almost simultaneously, while his body sat there inactive. "Greg, the girls must have arrived at Molo's place by now. If only they know where they are. I have lookouts throughout the city, with intricate and complete connecting equipment. Greg, I must disconnect." "Colonel, give me Anita's frequency. Maybe Snap or I can pick up the message." He named the oscillating frequency, then disconnected. "Try that frequency," Snap suggested. "We've got to do something." The door slide opened suddenly, and an orderly appeared. "Haljan?" "Get the hell away," roared Snap. "We've had our orders. We don't want any from you." "Greg Haljan and Daniel Dean are paged on the mirrors." Someone in the city wanted us. Our names were appearing on the various mirror grids publicly displayed throughout the city in the hope that we would answer. "That's different," said Snap. "Answer it for us, that's a good fellow. We're busy." "It must be important," the orderly insisted. "The caller registered a fee at the search bureau. That's how they located you here. He paid the highest fee to search you, an emergency call." It was against the law to invoke the services of the search bureau unless based upon actual impending danger. "We'll take it," I said. "Come with me." He turned to the left and down the corridor. We hastened with him to a corridor cubby. Upon the autophone there I was at once connected with a voice, and an anxious man's face with a 2-day growth upon it. "Haljan, thank God you answered. This is Dud Ardley. Me and Shaq are here. Listen, this is the lower cellar corridor, lateral 3, under Broadway. Me and Shaq just have seen your girls down here." News of Anita and Venza. I could see in the mirror image, behind Dud's head, the outlines of the little public cubby from which he was calling. He and his brother, on some illicit errand of their own in East Side Lower Manhattan, had seen figures alighting from a fare car. They had caught a glimpse of the faces of Anita and Venza. The girls were hooded and cloaked. A hooded man was with them. The fare car quickly rolled away, and the hooded figures, suddenly becoming invisible within their magnetic cloaks, had vanished. "S'help me, we couldn't do nothing. You know we take no chances with the police by carrying cylinders, so I paged you in a hurry." "Dud, that's damn nice of you. Where are you now? Tell me again." The Ardleys, knowing nothing of the events of this night, supposed that the girls were being abducted, and decided I should be informed. "Damn right, Dud. We'll come at once. You two wait for us?" "Sure. If you got instruments, maybe we can track 'em. It wasn't a quarter of a mile from here, over toward the river. Plenty of rotten dumps down there." "Wait for us, Dud. We'll come in a rush." I slammed shut the autophone. Snap, beside me, had heard it all. He shoved the astonished orderly out of the way. "What's the nearest exit route out of here?" "To the city roof, sir. Up this incline." We dashed up the spiral incline, through a low exit port, and were in the starlight of the city roof. "Connected, Greg? You can't tell. Her message might come over any minute." I tuned my coils to the seldom used oscillation frequency which Halsey had told us Anita's transmitter was sending. "Anything, Greg?" "No. Dead channel." The air in Anita's channel was bafflingly silent. We had been challenged by a roof guard when we appeared from the upper port of the conclave hall. The city roof was not open to public traffic. But with our identifications, he found us a single-seat hand tram and started us southward on the deserted route. It was a cloudless night, with stars like thickly strewn diamonds on purple velvet. The city roof lay glistening in the starlight. In my great-grandfather's time there had been no roof here. The open city was exposed to all the inclement weather. But gradually the arcades and overhead viaducts, cross balconies and catwalks which spanned the canyon street between the giant buildings became a roof. It spread, now terraced and sloped to top the lofty buildings, like a great rumpled sheet propped by the knees of sleeping giants. Some of the roof was of opaque alumite, dark patches, alternating with the great glassite panes which in places admitted the daylight. Our little tram sped along southward, wending its way over the terraces. Save for the guards and lookouts in their occasional cubbies, and the air traffic directors in their towers, we were alone up here. The roof was tangled with air pipes, line wire conduits, aerials, arterial systems of the ventilating and lighting devices. As far as one could see, the ventilators stood fronting the night breeze like listening ears. There were water tanks, great cross bulkheads, and flumes to handle the rain and snow. A few traffic towers maintained order in the overhead air lanes. Their beacons shot up into the sky when the passing lights marked the thinly strewn tri-night traffic. We were stopped at intervals, but in each case were passed promptly. "Nothing yet, Greg?" "No." Anita's channel remained empty. It was, I suppose, no more than 10 minutes during which we sped south along the grotesque maze of the roof. But to us it was an eternity. If only some message would come. "I'll pull up here." "Yes." I gathered up my little autophone, thrust it under my dark flowing cloak. If only our cloaks were magnetic. We leaped from our car. "In a rush, Haljan?" asked a guard. "That's us. Orders from Mr. Brayley." We left him and plunged into a descending automatic lift. A drop of 1,000 feet. We shot downward past all the deserted levels, past the ground level, the undersurface transportation lanes, the sub-river tubes, the sub-cellar, down to the very bottom of the city. "Come on, Greg. 2 segments from here." We advanced at a run. At this hour of night, hardly a pedestrian was in evidence. It was an arched, vaulted corridor, almost a tunnel, dimly blue-lit with short lengths of fluorescent tubes at intervals on the ceiling. For all the vaunted mechanisms of our time, the air here was heavy and fetid. Moisture dripped from the concrete roof. It lay on the metal pavement of the ground. The smell of it was dank, tomb-like. There were frequent cross-tunnels. We turned eastward into one of them. For a segment there were the lower entrances to the cellars of the giant buildings overhead. We passed a place where the tunnel corridor widened into a great underground plaza. The sewerage and wire pipes lay like tangled pythons on its floor. Half across it, by the glow of temporary lights strung on a cable, a group of repairmen were working. We passed them, headed in to where the tunnel narrowed again, and there were now occasional cubby entrances to underground dwellings. It was a rabbit warren from here to the river, haunted by criminals and by miserable families, many of whom never saw the daylight for weeks at a time. The giant voices of the city hardly carried down here, so that an oppressive silence hung upon everything. "That next crossing, Greg. They said they'd wait for us there." Occasional escalators led upward. In advance of us was a narrow intersection. There were a few lights in the bullseyes of the subterranean dwelling rooms, but most of them were dark. Easy, Snap. Not so fast. I pulled Snap to a walk. We edged over against the tunnel side. We had passed a small lighted autophone cubby, evidently the one from which Dud and Shack had paged us. They should have been here waiting, but there was nothing but the empty, gloomy tunnels. Something is coming! Snap clutched at me. We drew our cloaks around us and waited in a shadowed recess. Down a side incline, a segment behind us, a small automatic food truck came lurching. It pulled up at an arcade entrance. Its driver slid the portals, deposited his cases of food, locked the panel after him, and in a moment he and his truck were gone up the incline. We heard, in the ensuing silence, a low groan near at hand. Then abruptly it stopped. We saw within 20 feet of us 2 dark figures lying on the pavement grid in a black patch of shadow where the mail tube came down in a curve and disappeared into the tunnel wall. We bent over the figures of the 2 men. They lay together, one half upon the other, black-garbed figures with white, staring faces. One twitched a little and then lay still. They were Shack and Dud Ardley. Murdered, Greg! Good Lord! Both were dead, but we could see no marks on either of them. I found my wits. Snap, we can't stand like this wholly visible. I pulled Snap away. We darted a few feet. The light of the tunnel intersection was directly over us. Not here, Snap. Run! Under the curving vacuum tube a little further along, we found shelter. Snap murmured, "The girls went past here. But which way, Greg?" As though I knew. I felt at that moment, under the shirt against my skin, the anode of my autophone tingling. A receiving signal. In the gloom I could see Snap's white face as he watched me bring it out. We heard a tiny microphonic voice, Anita's voice. "Colonel Halsey, yes, I have the location. Lafayette 4, East Corridor, lowest level. A descending entrance. Don't you speak again. I've only a minute. Venza safe, but send help. Something we don't understand. A strange mechanism here." Then Halsey's interrupting voice. "Anita, escape. You and Venza." "We can't. They've got us." "I'm sending men. They'll be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes will be too late. Molo is..." It seemed that we heard her scream. Then the waves blurred and died. Lafayette 4, East Corridor, lowest level. Snap, that's here. A descending entrance. We stood back against the great curving side of the postal vacuum tube. Within it, I heard the hiss and clank as a mail cylinder flashed past. Halsey's secret orders must be going out now. His men nearest this place would come in a rush, but Anita said that would be too late. Snap and I were frantically searching. Somewhere here was an entrance to Molo's lair. It seemed in the silence that Anita's scream was still ringing in my ears. Had it been entirely from the instrument, or were we so close that we had heard its distant echoes? "Greg, help me." Snap was tugging at a horizontal door slide, like a trap in the tunnel floor, partly under the vacuum tube. "Stuck," he gasped. It yielded with our efforts. It slid aside. Steps led downward into blackness. We plunged in, caution gone from us. The steps went down some 20 feet. We were in another, smaller corridor. It was vaguely lighted by a glow from somewhere, and as my pupils expanded, I could see this was a shabby alley, opening ahead into a winding passage with the slide port above us like its back gate. A warren of cubbies was here, a little sequestered segment of disreputable dwellings. We stood peering, listening. Shall I try the eavesdropper, Greg? Yes. No, wait. I thought I heard distant sounds. Voices, Snap. Listen. More than voices. A thud. Footsteps running. A commotion back in this warren within 100 feet of us. "This way," I murmured. We plunged into a black gash. There was a glow of light, a glassite pane in a house wall nearby. The commotion was louder, and under it now we heard a vague humming, something electrical. It was an indescribably weird sound, like nothing I had ever heard before. Snap clutched at me. "In here. But where is the accursed door?" There was a glassite pane, but we could find no door. In our hands we held small electronic bolt cylinders, short-range weapons. The hum and hissing was louder. It seemed to throb within us, as though vibration were communicating to every fiber of our bodies. Light was streaming through the glassite pane, and we glimpsed the interior of the room. The light now came from a strange mechanism set in the center of the metal cubby. I caught only an instant's glimpse of it, a round thing of coils and wires. The metal floor of the room was cut away, exposing the gray rock of Manhattan Island. And against the rock, in a 10-foot circle, a series of discs were contacted, with wires leading from them to the central coils. The whole was glowing with opalescent light. It was dazzling, blinding. Within it, the goggled figure of Molo was moving, adjusting the contacts. He stooped. He straightened, drew back from the light. Only an instant's glimpse, but we saw the girls, crouching with black bandages on their eyes. Mika, goggled like her brother, was holding them. A tall shape carrying a round black box darted through the light and ran. Molo leaped for the girls. The hum had mounted to a wild electrical scream. Molo flung his sister back out of the light. They all vanished. There was nothing but the light and the mounting dynamic scream. Beside me, Snap was pounding on the glassite panel. I joined him. Everything was dreamlike, blurring as though unconsciousness was upon me. Where was Snap? Gone? Then I saw him nearby. He had found a door, but it wouldn't yield. I saw his arm go up in a gesture to me. He ran. I found myself running after him, but I stumbled and fell. Then over me the scream burst into a great roar of sound. It seemed so intense, so gigantic a sound, that it must ring around the world. And the light burst with an exploding puff. The black metal cubby walls seemed to melt like phantoms in a dream. A Titan's blowtorch, the opalescent light shot upward, a circular 10-foot beam eating its way through all the city levels as though they were paper up through the city roof. Molo's cubby was gone. His mechanism was eaten by the light and destroyed. There was only this motionless, upstanding beam, contacted here with the earth, streaming like an opalescent sword into the starry sky. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 5. I must paint now upon a broader canvas to depict the utter chaos of this most memorable night in the history of the Earth, Venus, and Mars. From that point in the bowels of Greater New York, near the southern tip of Manhattan Island, the mysterious light beam shot up. It screamed with its weird electrical voice for an hour, so penetrating a sound that it was heard with the unaided ears as far away as Philadelphia. A Titan voice it was, shrill as if with triumph. There were millions of people awakened by it this night, awakened and struck with a chill of fear at this nameless siren shrilling its note of danger. The sound gradually subsided. It seemed to reach its peak within a few minutes of the appearance of the light, and within an hour it had ceased. But the light beam remained. Those who inspected it closely have given a clear description of its aspect, but to this day its real nature has never been determined. It was a circular beam of about a 10-foot diameter. In color it was vaguely opalescent, rather more brilliant at night than in the day. With the coming of the sun it did not fade, but remained clearly visible, with a spectrum sheen when the sunlight hit it, so that it had somewhat the appearance of a titanic straightened rainbow. From that contact point with our Earth, the inexplicable beam stood vertically upward. It ate a vertical hole like a chimney up through all the city levels, through the roof and into the sky. It had a tremendous heat, communicable by contact, so that it melted the city above it with a clean round hole. But the heat was non-radiant. I was found lying within 50 feet of the base of the beam. There had been an explosion, so that Molo's metal room was gone, but from where I lay there was only a warmth to be felt from the light. Halsey's men found me within half an hour. I was unconscious, but not injured. I think now that the sound and not the light overcame me. I presently recovered consciousness. For another hour I was blind and deaf, but that quickly wore off. They rushed me through the chaos of the city to the Tappan headquarters. Grantline was there, but not Snap. I sent them back when once I was fully conscious. They searched all the vicinity at the base of the light. Snap, alive or dead, was not to be found. Anita and Venza were gone. I had seen Molo and Mika plunge away with them as the light beam burst forth. They were gone, and Snap was gone. There was by now a turmoil unprecedented throughout all the metropolitan area. The motionless light beam itself had done little damage, but its appearance brought instant chaos. Within a radius of 5 miles of its base, the city was plunged into darkness. All power was cut off. Every vehicle, even the arrows passing overhead, and the ventilating system stopped. Autophones were wrecked. It subsided within an hour, though, and after that lights and instruments brought into the area were not affected. But during that hour, South Manhattan was in panic. A multitude of terrified people awakened in the night to find blackness and that screaming sound. The streets and corridors and traffic levels were jammed with throngs trampling and killing one another in their efforts to escape. This was in the stricken area, but everywhere else the panic was spreading. Transportation systems were almost all out of commission. The panic spread until by dawn there was a wild exodus of refugees jamming the bridges and viaducts and tunnels, streaming from all the city exits. This was Greater New York. But from Venus and Mars came similar reports. In Grebhar and in Ferrok-Shan, doubtless almost simultaneous with Greater New York, similar light beams appeared. But what can it be? I demanded of Grantline. Something Molo contacted there? He did it. That was what he was working for, and he accomplished his purpose. But what will the beam do to us? It's doing plenty, said Grantline grimly. He didn't intend that. There was something else. But what? As yet, no one knew. I had already told the authorities what I had seen. I was the only eyewitness to Molo's activities, and heaven knows I had but a brief, confused glimpse. The beam remained. It streamed upward from the rock. They thought, this night, that Molo's strange current had set up a disintegration of the atoms, and that electronic particles from them were streaming into space. The light beam seemed impervious to attack. Within a few hours the authorities were attacking its base with various vibratory weapons, but without success. From where Grantline and I sat, we saw the dawn coming. But the radiance beam remained unaffected. Greg, look there at Venus. To the east of us, there was a distant line of metal structures surmounting the mid-Westchester hills. Above them, in the brightening sky of dawn, Venus was just rising. Mars had already set at our longitude. Venus, fairly close to the Earth now, was the morning star. It mounted now above that line of metal stages in the distance. And as Grantline gestured, I saw from Venus the same sword-like beam streaming off almost across our own. Grantline and I, with a mutual thought, ran around the balcony and gazed to where Mars had set. A narrow radiance was streaming up among the stars off there. 3 swinging swords of light in the sky. With the rotation of the planets, they swept the firmament. The mysterious enemy had planted them, but why? What was coming next? And as though to answer us, from far to the south, over mid-Jersey, came a new manifestation. We saw a speck rising, a distant mounting speck of something dark, with streamers of tiny radiance flowing from it. A spaceship, Greg. It seemed so. It came slowly from above the maze of distant structures, gathered speed, and in a moment was gone. But others, better equipped, had observed it. It was a cylindrical projectile, with stream fluorescence propelling it upward, an unusual form of spaceship. Telescopically, it was seen until well after dawn, speeding out in the direction of the moon. Molo and his weird allies had escaped, I thought. With their work done here on Earth, they were off to rejoin the hovering enemy ship 200,000 miles out. I stood gripping Grantline on that balcony and gazed with sinking heart. Were Anita and Venza prisoners on that mounting ship? And Snap, I prayed he was there with the girls to lend them the protection I had failed to give. Aljan and Grantline wanted below. The voice of a mechanic on the balcony behind us roused us from our thoughts. We went down through the busy building. The workshops of Tappan Interplanetary Headquarters had for hours been ringing with busy activity. The Commissara rested upon her departure stage outside, with a score of workmen conditioning her. Newly installed additional armament was aboard, ready to be assembled after the start. The men to handle it were embarked. My half-dozen officers and the 10 members of the crew I had already briefly met. They were waiting for me. On we go, Greg. Let's wish ourselves luck. From grim, silent abstraction, Grantline had now sprung into his familiar dynamic self. There was a solemn group of officers and 100 or so workmen here. They stopped their fevered labors now to watch the Commissara get away, first of Earth's ships speeding into space to confront this nameless enemy. Grantline and I went past them with silent handshakes and murmured goodbyes. I saw the towering figure of Brayley. He raised an arm for a farewell gesture to us. We mounted the incline to the Commissara. She rested upon her stage, a great, sleek bronze ship, low and rakish, with pointed ends and a flattened, arched turtleback dome of glassite covering the superstructure and the decks from bow to stern. She lay quiescent, gleaming in the glow of the departure beacons, but there was an aspect of latent power upon her. My ship! My first command! As we went through the opened port of the dome side, and I touched foot upon the deck, I prayed that I might justify the faith reposed in me. Men crowded the narrow, covered deck. I saw the space guns at the deck pressure ports, partly assembled. My chief officer, a young fellow named Drac Davidson, who with his twin brother had been in the Interplanetary Freight Service, rushed up to me. "We're ready, sir." "Very good, Drac." He hurried me to the turret control room. Grantline instantly had plunged into details of assembling the weapons. "Her ports are all closed," said Drac. He spoke calmly, but his thin face was pale, and his dark eyes glowed with excitement. "The interior pressure is set at 15 pounds. You can ring us up at once." No formalities to this departure. With pounding heart, I entered the small circular turret and mounted its tiny spiral stairs to the upper control room. But as I touched the levers, calmness came to me with these familiar tasks at which I was skilled. I slid a central hull gravity plate. It went smoothly, perfectly operated by the magnets. The vessel trembled, lifted. Outside the enclosing dome, I could see the dawn light of the sky and paling floodlights of the stage. Figures of men out there made silent gestures of farewell, dropping slowly beneath our hull as we lifted. The bow gravity plates slid into the repulsive force positions. The bow lifted. The Cometara responded smoothly. We went up, poised at a 45-degree angle. I saw the outer beacons on the stage swing upward with their warning to passing traffic in the lower lanes. Light our bow beacon, Drac. We lifted through the lower 1,000 and 2,000-foot lanes. The lights of Tappan were dwindling beneath us. The interior of the Cometara was humming with the whir of its circulators and air receivers, mingled with the throb of air pressure pumps. At 3,000 feet, I started the air rocket engines. They came on with a gentle purring. The fluorescence from them streamed along our hull and down past the stern, like twin rocket tails. With gathering speed, we slid smoothly upward through the highest traffic lanes, out of the atmosphere, through the stratosphere, and into space. Leaving the stratosphere, I cut off the air rocket engines, slid the stern gravity plates for the Earth's repulsion and the bow plates for the attraction of the moon and sun. The firmament swung in a slow arc and steadied with the Earth behind us and the sun and moon in advance of our bow. We were on our course, plunging through space with accelerating velocity toward the unknown enemy ship hovering 200,000 miles ahead of us. My orders were to find the ship and maneuver us close to it, and Grantline's orders were to assail it. I gazed down at the convex North Atlantic with the reddening coastline of North America spread like a map. What was the nature of this strange enemy whom we sought? That opalescent beam from greater New York mounted with its radiance into the dome-like star field. The one from Venus and the other from Mars seemed crossing overhead amid the stars. 3 swords crossing the sky. What did they mean? Will you swing east or west of the moon? We haven't decided. Drac Davidson and I were alone in the Cometara's control turret. We were some 10 hours out from Earth. Over such short astronomical distances, it was impossible to attain any great velocity. When once we were clear of the Earth's atmospheric envelope, the rocket stream engines were useless. The Cometara was equipped also with tail streamers of electronic nature. They exerted a slight pressure, useful for sudden curving and turning, but they had only negligible influence upon the main velocity of the vehicle. I used the repulsion of the Earth upon our negatively charged stern gravity plates, and with those of the bow electronified to the positive reaction, we were drawn forward by the sun and the moon. For 3 or 4 hours I held to this combination with steady acceleration, but then I had to retard. In close quarters such as this, the retarding velocity must be calculated with a nicety many hours in advance. We hung now, very nearly poised, within some 40,000 miles of the surface of the moon. Bleak and cold, sharply black and white, it hung in a gigantic crescent in advance of our bow. The sun, whose attraction I had ceased using some hours back, was visible sharply to one side now. Its great gas streams of giant flame licked up into the blackness of the firmament. The sunlight caught the lunar mountains with a white glare and left the valleys black with shadow. Moonlight and the mingled sunlight painted our bow. Behind our stem, the great disk of Earth hung somber and glowing. And everywhere else was the great black enclosing firmament. The stars blazed with a new white glory never seen through the haze of an atmosphere. Like a little world in the vastness of this awesome void, we hung poised. Grantline came into the turret. "I've got everything ready, Greg. By the gods, once you can lay telescope upon that accursed enemy ship, I'm ready to open fire on it." "Good," I said. But the thought of hurling our bolts at this enemy ship had struck terror into my heart for hours past. I was convinced that the three who in all the world were dearest to me, Anita, Venza, and Snap, were upon that enemy vessel. Grantline asked, "Are you going closer to the moon?" "No." "The ship couldn't be between us and the moon. Waters and I have been in the helio room for the past hour, searching with the scope there. Nothing doing, Greg. Not a sign." "I know. Our instruments here show that." "There might be a way of sighting them," Drac put in. "I'll try the Z-ray," I suggested. "Drac and I have it corrected, but I doubt if it would penetrate the sort of invisibility this enemy would use." Grantline nodded. "Or the Benson curve light. You think the ship went behind the moon? Or landed on the moon?" "It could have done either. Has Waters still got contact with the Earth? Have they seen it?" "No." I made a sudden decision. It would take us 2 hours at least to make a careful scanning with the Z-ray. And to take an elaborate series of spectroheliographs of the moon's surface, which might show the enemy vessel if it had landed there, was a laborious process. After brief thought, I discarded the idea. "We'll go to the helio room," I told Grantline. "I'm going to try the Benson curve light." Grantline and I left the turret, heading along the catwalk under the glassite dome toward the helio cubby where the rotund middle-aged Waters was in charge. It made my heart sink to think of the helio room. Snap should have been there. We crossed the transverse catwalk. The superstructure roof was under us. Farther down, the narrow decks showed, with Grantline's men grouped at the firing ports, where his weapons were mounted and ready. As I saw those grouped men loitering on the deck, waiting for me to give them a sighting, I prayed I could do so. And yet there was the shuddering fear that the first blast would bring death to Anita. Waters met us at the door of his cubby. His face was red. He mopped the perspiration from his bald head. "I'm so glad you came. Will you want the Benson light? I say, I've lost connection with the Earth. I had the Washington transmitter. 5 minutes ago they sent me a flash of the Mars and Venus news. They both sent ships out." He gasped for breath, then added in a rush, "Both the Mars and Venus ships were destroyed and the enemy escaped." Grantline and I gasped with horror. "Destroyed?" I said. "How?" Waters did not know. The news came, then, immediately after, the Washington transmitter changed its wavelength and he lost connection. "But why in heaven's name, man, didn't you ring and tell us?" Grantline demanded. "Destroyed? Only that? Just destroyed?" "I was afraid to leave my instruments," Waters said. "How could I tell? I might be able to renew connections with Washington any minute. Come on in. Do you want to try the Benson curve light, Mr. Haljan?" "Yes," I said. "I do." We entered the dim helio cubby. "See here, Waters. What about the projectile that ascended from Earth last night? Did the Washington Observatory report what happened to it?" "No, not a word. They lost it, evidently." Our scopes on the Cometara had not been able to locate the projectile. The large instruments of Earth had lost it. Was that because, with tremendous velocity, it had sped directly for the new planet out beyond Mars? Or, with some form of invisibility, might it be close to us now, just as the lurking ship might be somewhere around here? From the little circular helio cubby, perched here under the dome like an eagle's nest, I could see down all the length of the ship, and out the side ports of the dome to the blazing firmament. The sun, moon, and Earth, and all the starfield, were silently turning as Drax swung us upon our new course. Waters bent over the projector of the Benson curve light, making connections. The cubby was silent and dim, with only a tiny spotlight where Waters was working, and a glow upon his table where his recent messages from Earth were filed. Grantline and I glanced at them. Panic in Greater New York, Grebhar, and Ferrok-Shan. The 3 strange beams which the enemy had planted on Earth, Venus, and Mars still remained unchanged. I could see them now plainly from the helio-cubby windows, great shafts of radiance sweeping the firmament. Waters straightened from his task. "That will do it, Mr. Haljan." He met me in the center of the cubby. "When you locate the enemy, do you think they'll destroy us, as they did those other ships?" Grantline laughed grimly. "Maybe so, Waters. But let's hope not." Fat little Waters was anything but a coward, but being closed up here all these hours with a stream of dire messages from Earth had shaken him. "What I mean, Mr. Grantline, is that prudence is sometimes better than reckless valor. The Cometara is no warship. If Earth had sent an international patrol vessel..." Grantline did not answer. He joined me at the Benson projector. "Can we operate it from here, Greg? Or will you mount it in the bow?" "From here. Drax swinging. When he's on the course I gave him, I can throw the Benson ray through the bow dome port. Waters, you're all done in. Go below and sleep a while." But he stood his ground. "No, sir. I don't want to sleep." "We've had hours," said Grantline. "We'll call you if anything shows up." We sent Waters away. "Ready, Greg?" "Yes. I've got the range." The coils hummed and heated with the current, and in a moment the Benson curve beam leaped from the projector. The Benson curve light was similar to an ordinary white searchlight beam, except that its path, instead of being straight, could be bent at will into various curves. Hyperbola, parabola, and for its extreme curve the segment of an ellipse, gradually straightening as it left its source. It was effective for police work, with hand torches for seeing around opaque obstructions. It had also another advantage, especially when used at long range. The enemy, when gazing back at its source, would under normal circumstances conceive it to be a straight beam, and thus be misled as to the location of its source. Or even realizing it to be curved, one had no means of judging the angle of the curve. A narrow white stream of light, it flung through our window oval, forward under the dome, and through the bow dome bullseye into space. I saw the men on the deck spring into sudden alertness with the realization we were using it. The bow lookout on the forward observation bridge crouched at his scope finder to help us search. From the control turret came an audiphone buzz, and Drax's voice. "Am I headed right? The swing is almost completed." "Finish the job and don't bother me now." I bent over the field mirror of the projector. On its glowing 10-inch grid the shifting image of my range was visible, a curving, brilliant limb of the moon, with the sunlight on the jagged mountain peaks. Everywhere else was the black firmament and the blazing dots of stars. Grantline crouched beside me. "I'll work the amplifiers. Going to spread it much, Greg?" "Yes. A full spread first. We're in no mood for a detailed narrow search." I gradually widened the light. 3 feet here at its source, it spread in a great widening arc. With the naked eye we could see its white radiance, fan-shaped as an edge of it fell upon the moon. And though optically it was not apparent, the elliptical curve of it was rounding the moon, disclosing the hidden star field to our instruments. "Nothing yet?" I murmured. "No." "I'll try a narrower spread and less curve." Grantline was searching the magnified images on the series of amplifier grids. There was nothing. For an hour we worked, then suddenly Grantline cried, "Greg, wait! Hold it!" I tensed, stricken. I held the angle and the spread of light steady. 2 seconds of arc east. Try that. The damned thing is shifting." He gripped me. "It's at the eastern edge of the field. It shifts off. It must be in rapid motion." Then I saw it, a mere moving dot of black, but suddenly it clarified. I saw a dot which I could imagine was a shape with disks along its edge, moving with high velocity. Grantline was shifting our field to hold it. Got it, Greg. By God, that's it. Now we'll see. Then presently we saw that from its bow a very faint radiant beam was streaming. Beside me, I heard Grantline gasp. Greg, am I crazy? Or is that bow beacon like the light beam planted in Greater New York? There did seem to be a similarity, but thought of it abruptly was swept from my mind. Our cubby was alive with signals. Both the bow and the stern observers saw the enemy ship now with their scopes gazing directly along our Benson light. And Drac was calling, I've got the measurement of its velocity, doubling every 10 seconds. God, what acceleration! I flung off the Benson light. The enemy ship had come from behind the limb of the moon. Our straight light telescope showed it clearly. It was heading unmistakably in our direction. Drac was pleading, We need velocity. Are you coming to the turret? Yes. Grantline and I rushed out upon the catwalk. Waters was mounting the spiral ladder from the deck. Into your cubby, I shouted. Call Earth. Keep calling until you get them. Grantline rushed for the deck. I gained the control turret. Drac, with his fin face white and set, met me at the door. We need velocity. I nodded. We'll get it, Drac. Have no fear of that. I set the gravity plates for the greatest possible acceleration forward and added the stern rocket engines for narrow-angle maneuvering. With gathering speed, we plunged directly for the oncoming enemy ship. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 6. But there's something wrong, Drac. We've got grade 5 acceleration. Grantline had joined us in the control turret. How far would you say, at a rough guess, that ship is from us now? 30,000 miles, about that. Drac scanned his page of calculations. Impossible to gauge with any exactness. They change their pace so often, and I can't figure out how large the damn thing is. Say they've got a 40,000 velocity. Added to our 10, that's 50. And we're accelerating. In half an hour we'll be within range. But there's something wrong, I persisted. For several minutes now, I had been aware that the Kamatara was acting strangely. A sluggish response to the controls, I thought, but when I called Engine Chief Franklin, he had not noticed it. Yet I was certain. Grantline stared at me. Something wrong? Yes. Drac, try orienting us. I did it 10 minutes ago. I shoved him at my equations, giving the angles with the sun, earth, and moon which we should now have. There's our flight course as it ought to be. Measure how we're heading, actual position. If it's what it ought to be, with the plane combinations I'm using, then I'm crazy. Oh, you're just naturally apprehensive, Grantline said. But we were not where we should be. The Kamatara was off her predetermined course. And then I realized the factor of error. There was a gravitational force here, for which I was not allowing. The error was not within the Kamatara. She was responding perfectly. But there was a force upon her, and not that of the sun, earth, moon, or the distant star field. I had calculated all of these. It was something else, some gravitational pull, so that we were not upon the course of flight we should have been on. But what could be wrong? Grantline demanded. It was Drac who guessed it. That radiance from the enemy's bow? It was that, we felt certain. Even at this 30,000-mile distance, the bow beacon seemed streaming upon us. We could not see that it illumined the Kamatara, nor could our instruments measure any added illumination. Our flight orbit, if held, would carry us with a swing some 10,000 miles above the south pole of the moon. It would cross diagonally in front of the trajectory that the enemy vessel was maintaining. But we were off our predetermined course, with a side drift toward the enemy. That bow beacon radiance was exerting a force upon us, a strange gravitational pull. Grantline gasped when Drax said it. If it's that now, what will it be when it gets closer? The minutes were passing. The 30,000 miles between us and the enemy was cut to 10,000, to 5. The ship was soon visible to the naked eye. Its visual movement, for all this time measurable only as a drift upon the amplified images of our instruments, now was obvious. We could see it plunging forward, could see that probably we would cross its bow. Within 50 miles? We hoped and guessed that would be the result, so that with this first passing we could use our weapons. 50 miles of distance at combined speeds of some 50,000 miles an hour. That would be something like 3 seconds from a collision. The danger of a collision, which both ships would do anything to avert, was negligible. In the immensity of space, two objects so small could not strike each other, even with intention, once in a million times. We could not calculate the passing so closely, but suddenly it seemed that perhaps the enemy could. The bow beacon radiance, so obviously a miniature of the weird light beams streaming from Earth, Mars, and Venus, now swung away from us and was extinguished. Whatever alteration of our course the enemy had made, they seemed to be satisfied. The passing would be to their liking. Would it be to ours? Grantline had left the turret. He was down on the deck, ready with his men. The weapons were ready. We had long since advanced beyond the possibility of mathematical calculations keeping pace with our changing position in relation to the enemy, but it seemed that the passing would be within 50 miles. Grantline's weapons would carry their bolt that far. It was barely 2,000 miles away now. 2 minutes of time before the passing, I stared at it, a long, low ship of dark metal, red where the moonlight struck upon it. I estimated its size to be about that of the Cometara, but it was much more nearly globular. Upon its top, seeming to project from the terraced dome, was an up-pointing funnel, like the smokestack of an old-fashioned surface steam vessel, or like a great black muzzle of an old-fashioned gun. And in a row along the bulging middle of the hull, there was a series of little disks. The vessel was still a tiny blob, but every instant it was enlarging, doubling its visual size. Drax said tensely, 1,500 miles. We'll pass in a minute and a half. I turned the angle of the stern rocket streams. The firmament slowly began swinging. The enemy ship seemed swaying up over us. I was turning our top to it, so that Grantline might fire directly upward from both sides almost simultaneously. It might be possible if I could roll us over at just the proper seconds. But the enemy anticipated us. As they observed our roll, again the bow beacon flashed on. It visibly struck us, bathed all our length in its spreading opalescent radiance. It seemed for an instant to do nothing. Our dome did not crack. There was no shock. But our side roll slowed. The heavens stopped their swing, and then swung back. We were upon an even keel again, the enemy level with our bow. Against the force of my turning rocket streams, this radiation had righted us. It clung a few seconds more, and again vanished. Grantline's deck audiphone rang with his startled voice. "Greg, roll us over, quick! I can only fire from one side." "I can't." It was too late now. A few hundred miles of distance. Drax stood clutching me, staring through the port. And I stared, breathless, awaiting the results of these next few seconds. The ships passed like crossing, speeding meteors. A few seconds of final approach. I saw the enemy vessel as an elongated, flattened globe, with a triple terraced dome and terraced decks beneath it. That queer stack on top! The round discs, like 10-foot eyes, gleamed along the equator of the bulging hull. One of Grantline's weapons fired a silent flash. Still out of range. The spit of our electrons leaped from our side. The enemy was untouched. The thought stabbed at me. Anita. Not killed by that one. Another shot from Grantline. No result. It seemed that I saw the bolt strike. There was a reddening, a flash upon that bulging hull, but nothing more. I was aware again of the enemy bow beam swinging upon us. The beam was pressing us over again so that in a moment we would be hull bottom to the enemy and Grantline could not fire. He anticipated it. The ship was broadside to us. In the split second of that passing, I saw that it was not 50 miles away, hardly 10. Grantline flung his remaining bolts. The enemy was a streaked blur going by, and all in that second it was past, reddening in the distance. Untouched by our bolts? It seemed so. The bow radiance darted ahead of it. The globular shape, unharmed, dwindled in the distance behind us. And it had done nothing to us. The control levers were in my hands. I would shift the gravity plates and make the quickest turn we could. We would go around the moon, probably, and come back within an hour or two. Perhaps our adversary would also turn to encounter us again. At that second I had not seen the little discs, but I saw them now. They came sailing in a line, 10-foot, flat, circular discs of a dark metal. They gleamed reddish where the sunlight painted them. They had been fastened outside the enemy vessel, and in our passing they had been discharged. They sailed now like whirling plates. There seemed perhaps 20 of them, heading in a curve toward us. Grantline's voice came again from the deck audiphone. "Missed them, Greg. That's what I thought, but at least 2 of our bolts must have struck. But it didn't hurt them." "No," I replied. "It seemed not. They must have a defensive barrage." Drac was pulling at me. "Those things out there, those discs." Grantline demanded, "Yes, what in hell are they?" We could not tell. It seemed that their curve would take them behind our stern. Grantline added, "Will you try going back after that ship?" "Yes." But I did not. To the naked eye, the enemy ship had already disappeared, but with the scopes we saw that it seemed to be turning. I did not attempt to turn us, for we were afraid of those oncoming discs which took all our attention. They passed within 5 miles astern of us, but in a great curve they swung and now seemed heading across our bow. With what tremendous velocity they had been endowed by their firing mechanisms! Their elliptical curve swung them a mile or so ahead of us. They were circling us like tiny satellites in a narrowing spiral ellipse. Our attraction, the normal gravity of our close bulk, was drawing them to us. The men on the Kamatara's deck stood gazing, surprised but not yet alarmed. The lookout calls sounded with routine notification each time the discs passed across our bow and stern. In the helio cubby, Waters was still trying to raise an Earth station. Grantline came running to the control turret. "If those cursed things should strike us, Greg." I had set the gravity plates into new combinations, turning our course downward, trying to swing us under the plane of the disk's orbit. But they swung downward with us. They were no more than 2,000 feet away now. Grantline said, "At the next broadside passing, I'll fire at them." Drac looked up from his calculating instruments. "Look, a circular rotation, horribly swift, but I've caught a picture. Look." He had a still image of one of the discs. It had saw teeth at its thin knife-like outer circumference. Whirling at tremendous speed, these saw-toothed metal discs might cut into our dome or some other part of the ship. At the next round, Grantline fired. The discs reddened a little, but came on unharmed. From the other side he fired again. 3 of the discs seemed to have been caught full. His bolts, sustained for their fullest 10 seconds of duration at this close 1,000-foot range, took effect. The 3 discs seemed to crumble with a puff of queerly radiant vacuum spark glows, then were gone. But the others came closing in. The Commissara rang now with the excitement and alarm of the men. Grantline could not set his gauges fast enough to fire at every round. I had a sudden thought. With the rear rockets, I rolled us over. For a moment, we were hull down to the passing discs. From our hull gravity plates, I flung a full repulsion. Would it stave them off, bend their orbit outward? It did not. Their course was unaltered. Again, Grantline was shouting at me, "Roll us back! I must fire!" It had been an error, that rolling. Grantline lost several shots because of it. I swung us level. The discs passed within 100 feet. Half a dozen of them were still closer. Gleaming, whirling circles, thin as knife blades. They passed close under our stern, came broadside. These were tense, horrible seconds. The discs skimmed our bow, one seemed to miss our dome by inches. Grantline's volley annihilated 4 more, but there were still 8 of them. They swung in at our stern. I was aware of confusion throughout the Commissara. The crew and stewards were running up to the bow quarterdeck. My second officer stood there, stricken. The stern lookout screamed his futile warning. Useless. I saw one of the discs strike our stern dome, then another. Still others. They were silent blows, but it seemed that I could feel them cutting into the dome plates. The dome was cracking. Then, after that horrible instant, came the sound. Crunch, a rumble, the grind of crushed and breaking metal, then the puff and surge of the outward explosion. I saw the whole tip of the stern dome cracking, bursting outward, forced by our interior air pressure. And all over the Commissara, the outgoing air was sucking and whining with a growing rush of wind. I shouted, "Drac, close the stern bulkhead!" I set the word buttons for the distress siren and pulled the lever. Its voice screamed over the uproar. "Keep forward! Take the spacesuits! Prepare to abandon ship!" End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 7. In the midst of the chaos I was aware that all the remaining discs struck us upon the port stern quarter. The broken dome of the stern showed a jagged hole, but the upsliding cross bulkhead partially shut it off. 2 or 3 of the crew and the stern lookout were gone behind that closing bulkhead. Their bodies in a moment would be blown into space. "It may hold, Drac. Order Waters out of his cubby. Forward." I was calling the engine room. "Order your men up by the bow, not the stern." But I got no answer from the engine chief. I raised Grantline. "Order your men forward, clear amidships. I want to close the central bulkheads. If the stern one breaks with the pressure—" "Right, Greg. Are we lost?" "God knows. We'll know in a minute or two. Get all your men into their spacesuits. Keep in the bow. Prepare the exit port there." "Right, Greg. You coming down?" "Yes, when I finish." I cut him off. "Drac, get out of here. Did you order Waters forward?" "He won't leave." "Why the hell not?" "He thinks he may be able to get communication with Earth." "He can't stay where he is. There's no protection up here. When that stern bulkhead goes—" It was breaking. I could see it bending sternward under the pressure. And at best it was leaking air, so that the decks were a rush of wind. Already Drac and I were gasping with the lowered pressure. "Drac, get out of here. Go get Waters. Bring him forward. The hell with his transmitter. This is life or death." But you? I'm coming down. From the forward deck, call the hull control rooms, order everybody forward and to the deck. What about the pressure pumps? I can keep them going from here. I set the circulating system to guide the fresh air forward, but it was futile against the sucking rush of wind toward the stern. As the pumps speeded up, I saw, with the little added pressure, the great cross panel of the stern bulkhead straining harder. It would go in a moment. Drac was clinging to me. Tell me what to do. I've told you what to do. I shoved him to the catwalk. Get out of here, get waters forward, get the men out of the hull. His anguished eyes stared at me, then he turned and ran forward on the catwalk. I saw him forcibly dragging the bald-headed waters from the helio cubby. It was the last time I ever saw either of them. A buzzer was ringing in the turret, and I plunged back for it. The exertion put a band of pain across my chest, a panting constriction from the lowering pressure. Fanning, assistant engineer, was still at the pressure pumps. His voice came up. Pumps and renewers working. Will you use the gravity shifters? Hell no. Get out of there, Fanning. We're smashed. Air going. It's a matter of minutes. Abandoning ship. Get forward. Suddenly the stern bulkhead cracked with a great diagonal rift. I waited a moment to give them all time to get forward, then I slid all the cross midship bulkheads. It was barely in time. The stern bulkhead went out with a gale of wind, but the barrier amidships stemmed it. Half of the vessel sternward was devoid of air, but here in the bow we could last a little longer. Beneath me I could see Grantline's men, some of them, not all, and a few of the stewards, crew, and officers crowding the deck, donning spacesuits. The 2 side chambers were ready, half a dozen men crowded into each of them. The deck doors slid closed. The outer ports opened. Helmeted, goggled, bloated figures were blown by the outgoing air from the chamber into space. Then the outer slides went closed. The pumps filled up the chambers, the deck doors opened again. Another batch of men. I saw Grantline, suited but with his helmet off, dashing from one side of the deck to the other, commanding the abandonment. The central bulkhead seemed momentarily holding. Then little red lights in the panel board before me showed where in the hull corridors the doors were leaking, cracking, giving away, breaking under the strain. The whole ribbed framework of the vessel was strained and slewed. The bulkhead sides no longer set true in the casements. Air was whining everywhere and pulling sternward. It was the last stand. I was aware that the alarm siren had ceased. There was a sudden stillness, with only the shouts of the remaining men at the exit ports mingling with the whine of the wind and the roaring in my head. I felt detached, far away. My senses were reeling. I staggered to the gauges of the Errant system, the system whereby an oscillating current, circling within the double-shelled walls of hull and dome, absorbed into negative energy much of the interior pressure. The main walls of the vessel were straining outward. The Commotara could collapse at any moment. I started for the catwalk door. The electro-telescope stood near it, and I yielded to a vague desire to gaze into the eyepiece. The instrument was still operative. I swept it sternward. The enemy ship had not vanished. By what strange means I cannot say, its velocity had been checked. A few thousand miles from us, it was making a narrow, close-angled turn. Coming back? I thought so. I suddenly realized my intention of having all the gravity plates in neutral before abandoning the ship. I seized the controls now. An agony of fear was upon me that the shifting valves would fail, but they did not. The plates slid haltingly, reluctantly. I recall staggering to the catwalk. It seemed that the central bulkhead was breaking. There were fallen figures on the deck beneath me. I stumbled against the body of a man who had tangled himself in the stays of the ladder rail and was hanging there. I think I fell the last 10 feet to the deck. The roaring in my ears, the bands tightening about my chest encompassed all the world. Then I was on my feet again, and I stumbled over another body. It was garbed in a spacesuit with the helmet beside it. I stripped it of the suit. I was panting, with all the world whirling in a daze, bursting spots of light before my eyes. 10 feet away down the deck was the opened door of the pressure chamber. A bloated figure came into my dreamlike vista, moving for the pressure door. It turned, saw me, came leaping, and bent over me. I saw behind the visor that it was Grantline. His bloated, gloved hands helped me don my suit. He helped me with my helmet. The metal tip on Grantline's gloved hand touched the contact plate on my shoulder. His voice sounded from the tiny audiphone grid within my helmet. "Greg, thank God I found you. All right?" "Yes." My head was clearing. "I've got the chamber ready. We're the last, Greg." I gripped his shoulder. "You're sure there's nobody else?" "No. I've been everywhere I could reach. The central bulkheads are almost gone." He pushed me into the pressure chamber. There was hardly need to close the door after us. I stood gripping him as he opened the small outer slides. The abyss was at our feet. The outgoing wind tore at us like a gale, so that we stood gripping the casements. "Thank God you've got a power suit, Greg. So have I. We must keep together." "Yes." I could feel the floor grid of the chamber shuddering beneath my feet. The Commodore was cracking, bursting outward throughout her length. At any instant she might collapse. For a moment we stood poised. Beneath us, here at the brink, were millions upon millions of miles of emptiness, the remote, unfathomable void. Blazing worlds down there in the black darkness. "Goodbye, Greg. It may be the end for us." "Good luck, Johnny." His bloated figure dropped away from me. I waited just an instant, and then I dove into space. For a moment there was a chaos of strangeness, the wrench to my sense of the transition. I had been the inhabitant of a little world, the Commodore, with a gravity beneath my feet. Now, in a breath, I had no world to inhabit. I was alone in space. No gravity, nothing solid to touch, emptiness. I was in a world to myself, and the abnormality of it brought a mental shock. But in a moment the adjustment came. I passed the transition, the sense of falling. The firmament steadied and my senses cleared. My dive from the Commodore carried me in a slow arc some 300 feet away. There had been a sense of falling, but no actual fall. My velocity was retarded, with the mass of the Commodore pulling at me. I went like a toy boat in water shoved by a child, quickly slowing. In a few moments, the velocity was gone, and I hung poised. I saw Grantline's bloated form not over 50 feet from me. He waved an arm at me. Out here in the void I lay weightless, as though upon an infinitely soft featherbed. I could kick, flounder, but not endow myself with motion. I craned my neck, gazed around through the bulging visor pane. The earth and the sun hung level with the white star dots strewn everywhere. I could not see that unknown light beam from greater New York. It was shafting out now in the other direction so that the earth hid it from me. Venus was visible to one side of the sun. The enemy light stream from Grebhar was apparent, and as I turned my body and bent double to look behind me, I saw Mars and the sword-like ray from Ferric Shan. The beam streamed off like the radiance of the Milky Way, faintly luminous but seemingly visible for an infinite distance. The Commodore was obviously falling now toward the moon, drawn irresistibly, and all of us with her, toward the lunar surface. It seemed so close, that black and white mountainous disk. We were, I suppose, some 20,000 miles from it, gathering speed as it pulled at us. But that motion was not apparent now. Distance dwindled all these celestial motions, so that all the firmament seemed frozen into immobility. But there was some motion. 20 or more bloated figures, the survivors from the wreck of the Cometara, were encircling it in varying orbits, revolving around it like tiny satellites. Some were closing in, drawn against it. I saw one plunge against the wrecked dome and begin crawling like a fly. And I found that the forces of the firmament were molding my orbit also. My outward plunge was checked. I poised for an indeterminate instant, and then I took my orbit. I, too, was a satellite of the Cometara. I gazed at the wreck of the Cometara. My ship, my first command. So smoothly, confidently rising from the earth only a few hours ago, and she had come to this. She lay askew in the heavens. The dome was cracked throughout all its length and smashed like a shell at the stern tip. I could see the interior litter beneath the dome, the twisted and strained lines of the hull. A dead ship now, the mechanisms stilled, dead and silent inside, with all the warmth gone out of it. All the air dissipated, so that in every cubby, every dark corridor of that broken hull, there was the coldness and silence of interplanetary space. I suppose these thoughts swept me within a few seconds. I saw myself starting to revolve in my orbit. Perhaps my motion would carry me around indefinitely, or I might be drawn down to the vessel as those other survivors had been drawn. Grantline, with one of the few power suits, was coming toward me now, with tiny fluorescent streams back along his body from his shoulder blades. I switched on my own mechanism. It moved me toward him, and our gravity attracted us. We shut off the power when 20 feet apart, drifted together, contacted, bounced apart like rubber balls as our inflated suits struck. Then in a moment we had drifted back and clung. I touched the metal plate of his shoulder. Working all right? Yes. Thank God for this much, Greg. I wonder how many are alive. In the chaos of the abandonment, many of the men's air mechanisms had failed to operate. It is always so in times of disaster. We could see revolving around the wreck and motionless against its dome those horrible flabby, deflated suits where the delicate errance mechanism had failed. Within was only a corpse. Too many, I said, and not more than 4 or 5 of us with power. What shall we do first? Round them up? We must all get together. His answering voice was grim. We can tow them from the wreck. 6 or 7 of us altogether have power. Do you suppose we can get away, Greg? Get loose from the ship before she falls? Only trying it could tell us that. The Cometara, and all of us with her, were plunging for the moon. We would seek out the men who were alive and tow them in a string. If we could break the gravity pull of the ship and then struggle upward from the moon, we could maintain ourselves here in space until some rescue ship from Earth, Venus, or Mars would come and pick us up. You take one side, Greg. I'll take the other. Don't go aboard. She might collapse. I'll pick up the men without power and alive. The others with power suits will do the same. Then we'll meet out here, about where we are now? Yes. And hurry, Greg. Every mile toward the moon makes it that much harder. We're falling fast. Good luck. I shoved away from him, and within a minute, as he went in an arc toward the Cometara bow and I toward her stern, I suddenly thought of that returning enemy vessel. My last look through the scope had shown that she was returning, and then I had forgotten it. My gaze swept the firmament now. I had no scope instruments within the helmet. With the naked eye, the enemy ship was not in sight. But I knew that meant little. Within a moment she could come in view and be here if she were going at any great velocity. There were on the Cometara at the time of the disaster some 60-odd men, perhaps 40 had gotten away. And I could see very soon that not more than 15 or less out here were alive. 2 with power were ahead of me now, slowly floating past the wrecked dome of the stern. 1 had picked up 2 others, found them alive, and was towing them out. They went past me, moving very slowly so that I could see that 2 were all that one of us could tow and attain any velocity at all. I contacted with the leader. He was one of Grantline's men. 200 or 300 feet out, I directed. I gestured. Grantline said to meet out there. I'll tow others. Yes. Around the stern you'll find... God! Haljan, look! A mile from us the enemy ship was in view. Passing. No. Stopping. With incredible retardation she had plunged into view, was here, and yet had no great forward velocity. She seemed no more rapid than a great airliner winging past, so close that her reddish-tinged bulging hull length showed clearly. The discs were gone. The funnel set on top of her was sloped diagonally toward us as she rolled on her side, so that momentarily I could see down into it. There was some mechanism down there. The bow radiance was a narrow, opalescent beam in advance of the bow. Slowing, Haljan. Yes, stopping. Don't try to meet Grantline. Tow your men away. Or should we board the Cometara and hide? No. They've come back to bombard her. I kicked at him violently. With his 2 drifting figures clinging behind, he swung past me. I headed behind the stern. Upon its dangling framework several of our men were glued, lying there inert. I caught a glimpse of the interior of the stern, the littered deck. Men lying there had been stricken before they had time to get into their suits. On the outside, forward, I saw Grantline come rounding the bow, towing a figure and heading for another. On the outside of the bow peak, a group of others were perched, gesticulating for help. I started that way, then I saw another and nearer figure in a power suit heading for them. I swung back. There were 2 figures on the outside of the underhull whom I could more quickly reach. Inverted flies. Their feet were on the keel. They stooped and waved toward me. I took a swoop. Passing close down the hull, my rocket stream struck the hull plates and gave me sudden downward velocity. I shot down, out past the keel. And again I saw the enemy ship. She hung poised, no more than 2 miles away, and as I looped over, with all the black, star-strewn firmament in a dizzy whirl, the great moon disk, first above and then below me, I saw the bow beam of the enemy swinging. It came to the Cometara, and there it clung. I had gone perhaps 50 feet below the keel with my dive when I righted. I was mounting. I saw the opalescent 10-foot circle of the beam moving along the Cometara hull. It seemed to do no damage, then suddenly it darted down and clung to me. I felt nothing save the impact of a gentle push, something shoving with a ponderable force against me. I saw the Cometara receding, the heavens swinging as I turned over. The red disk of the distant Earth swooped. The moon's surface momentarily seemed rotating and lifting above me. I was helpless, rolling, then whirling end over end. Then again I steadied. The beam was gone from me. I saw the Cometara a full mile away from me. The enemy ship was again in motion, moving toward me, and between the Cometara and the Earth. And the beam was steady upon the Cometara's midsection. The Cometara had a new velocity now. I could not miss it. She was dwindling rapidly in visual size. Relative to me, she was receding, falling upon the moon. More than that, she was being pushed downward by the repulsive force of the strange enemy beam upon her. I stared, As with all the little dots which were our men around and upon her, she went down into the void. I found myself presently alone up here, with the enemy ship hovering nearby. Its maneuvering to thrust the wrecked Cometara toward the moon had brought it within a mile of me. The bow beam was still on the Cometara, and then abruptly it vanished. The Cometara had almost dwindled beyond the sight of my unaided vision. By chance, undoubtedly, the beam had fallen upon me and thrust me from the wreck. I was alone up here now with the enemy, but they may not have noticed me, or cared. I found my power mechanism intact. I turned it on. Slowly, like a log in water, I began moving away. A minute, 5 minutes. The Cometara was lost. Grantline, all the men, were lost. With that added downward thrust, they could never free themselves from the falling wreck. I was jerked out of my thoughts by the sight of an oncoming red blob. Something was coming from the enemy ship, red with the sunlight and earthlight, silvered by the moon and the stars. It took form. It was a disk, another of those cursed whirling disks, sent to annihilate me. Then, when it was a quarter of a mile away, I saw that it was a disk which was turning slowly. Rocket radiances came from its rotating circumference. It came sailing directly at me so swiftly that my own velocity was futile. Another minute, and I was caught. I saw that the disk was some 15 feet in diameter, and that it bulged, so that within its convex floor and ceiling was a space of several feet. I cut off my power, and with pounding heart lay waiting. The spacesuit had no weapons for equipment, save a knife hung in the belt. I drew it out, held it in my gloved fingers. The disk sailed upon its level, vertical axis. Its rotation slowed. I saw little windows set around its convex middle. It came up and bumped me with its metal side. I kicked away, shoved off. Shapes were moving in a dim interior light behind the port panes. Little hand beams of radiance darted out. They seemed to seize me, draw me. I found myself glued helplessly to the convex outer surface of the disk. The rotation gathered speed again, but I looked presently only at the gleaming surface to which I was pinned. Had I been a metal bar upon the horns of an electromagnet, I could not have been more helpless. An interval passed. With the contact plate of my fingers against this hull, it seemed that I could hear voices within, strange, indistinguishable words. I twisted, but could not see into the port. Again the rotation was slowing. The near shape of the enemy vessel swung close and past. And again I saw that we were over it, dropping down into the wide black opening of the funnel top. It yawned presently like a great black tunnel into which we fell. The jar of landing knocked me loose, and no doubt the attraction radiance also released me. I fell another space, bounced up and sank back. I thought that something like a sliding port door closed over me. And then, in the dimness, figures were gripping me. I lashed and struck, but the knife was wrenched away. I was a prisoner in a pressure port of the enemy ship. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 8. It seemed that the small room had a very faint radiance showing through my visor pane. Narrow enclosing walls were visible. It was a triangular-shaped space, 15 feet or so down one side, with a concave ceiling overhead. I was lying on the floor. The darkness at first had been impenetrable. The figures which had flung me down and seized my knife were gone. I had not seen them, nor where they went. For a moment I lay cushioned by my bloated suit. When I struggled to my feet, I was almost weightless. The movement of getting upright flung me upward as though I were a tossed feather. My helmet struck the metal ceiling, so sharp a blow that I feared for an instant I had smashed the helmet. From the ceiling, with flailing arms and legs, I sank back to the grid floor, and in a moment I was able to stand upright with so slight a feeling of weight that I could have been a bit of thistle ready to blow away in the least wind. There was, as I stood there balancing myself, a queer feeling of triumph within me. A triumphant hope, for coming down in the ship's capacious funnel, larger than it had seemed from a distance, I had seen what appeared to be a small projectile resting in some strange landing gear. The disk bearing me had settled on a stage alongside it. Was that the projectile from Earth? A growing air pressure was around me. The tiny Erentz dials within my helmet had been immovable, but now they were showing outside pressure. I stood waiting. Whatever sounds were here I could not tell. Then, presently, the dials stopped. They registered 17 pounds, whatever that might mean here. I loosed the helmet and took it off. With the first gasping breath my senses reeled. I sank to the floor, and though I tried to replace the helmet, it was too late. My thoughts were fading. A strange chemical odor was in my nostrils. It was like breathing a thin, perfumed water. The drifting away was pleasant. Tortured dreams came with my awakening. I found myself in the same dim room upon the floor. I could breathe better now, and in a few more hours the strangeness had almost gone. I found now that I was not injured, but I was ravenously hungry. Again, gingerly as before, I stood up and slid my spacesuit from me, and now I was aware of movement and sound. The floor grid vibrations were apparent, and there was a dim, distant, tiny throbbing. It was much like the interior of the Cometara while in flight. And there were other sounds, indescribably faint, yet strangely clear. I thought they might be distant voices. I took a cautious step. I could see a dim blank wall nearby with what seemed a bowl-like article of furniture on the floor against the wall. For all my caution, I sailed upward, but this time I held my balance. And I found that with my negligible weight, I could almost swim in this strange air. I hit the wall and slid slowly down it to the floor again, like a man sinking to the bottom of a tank. It suddenly occurred to me to put my ear against the wall. At once, the sounds all became incredibly louder. It was a confusion of sound, the mechanisms of the vessel, some of which I thought I could identify, and some not. The strange swish and thump of what might have been people moving. And there were voices. The voices seemed mingled babble coming from everywhere. The timbre of the sound was very strange. It held no suggestion of how far away from me the voices might be. There were so many of them I could only think they were scattered about the ship, and yet they all seemed together. After a moment, the blend was less confusing. Again, very strangely my hearing seemed able to separate one from the other. I was to learn that the atmosphere handled sound vibrations differently from that of Earth. Voices had a muffled tone, as though they were smothered. There was undoubtedly a vibrational distortion, and a sound wave speed slower than Earth's normal pressure rate of 1,050 feet a second, perhaps as slow as 700. Yet sounds remained audible over longer distances than on Earth. In this instance now, as I listened with my ear to the wall of the ship, I was hearing all its sounds picked up and carried by the metal. Now I heard a strange tongue, two types of voices, slow, measured, carefully intoned phrases, and voices of a curiously sepulchral, hollow sound. My mind went back to the Red Spark restaurant room. And suddenly I realized that amid the babble I was hearing English. A man's voice talking English. I caught very clearly the phrase, "Master, yes. She means well. Can you not see it?" Molo's voice. Then the girls must be here also. Another voice. I am not sure. Perhaps. The great intelligence will talk with her when we are arrived. It was the slow, measured voice of one of the brains. When will that be? Pretty soon now, won't it, Molo? Venza! A great wave of thankfulness swept me. And then I heard Anita. Your two captives, where are they? You're not going to kill them, are you? No, said Molo. Perhaps not. No one has inspected the new one yet. The other is being cared for. The great intelligence will question him when we arrive. We are arriving, said Venza. That's your world, Wandl, down there, isn't it? Yes. We are dropping fast. The voice of the brain. Come, Wick. The instruments are showing events on our captured worlds. Take me to watch. I am tired of movement. Yes, master. It seemed that the brain was being carried away. Molo and the two girls were being left alone. I had thought at first that they were in the adjacent room to me, but they could have been far distant. They had mentioned 2 captives. One, obviously, was myself. Was the other Snap? Come, Molo was saying. Stand here with me, and we will watch this world. Not mine, Venza Chia, as you just called it, but my adopted world. And it will be yours until we rule the new Mars. I heard them moving to gaze through the window port. Then came Anita's voice. If it's anything like this ship, it will be very strange. Strange indeed, little dove. I was there only once, a month ago, and for a few hours only. The great intelligence, as they call him, talked with me, absorbing my knowledge. They call it that. And he was much impressed by me, and made very wonderful promises in exchange for my fidelity, and for my sister, too. I learned further how Molo and Mika became identified with the Wandlites. It was as we had suspected. You will rule Mars? Venza was saying. When this is over, you mean you will really be given Mars to rule? I would rather live on the Earth, said Anita. There was a young man there. He will not be there much longer, Molo laughed. You are very lucky that I fancy you. Lucky indeed, Venza echoed. No death for me. I'm too young. But all those millions dead, it seems so terrible. It is, for them. Molo was in high good humor, pleased with himself and with these girls. See down there, that blurring is the heavy air. We're almost down to it now. I heard the sound of someone joining them, and then the hollow voice again. Molo, bad tidings come from Mars. One of the masters was captured there in Ferrok-Shan. They tortured him as they did the one on Earth, but he did not die unyielding. He spoke and told our plans. Ha! Did I not advise you to keep those helpless things on Wandl? But it is done now. The worlds know our purpose. They are preparing spaceships. Already some are rising from Ferrok-Shan, from Grebha, and from Greater New York. We knew they were doing that. But now they know our purpose. The Master Intelligence fears that they will come raiding Wandl. Our vessels are being made ready to go out and repel them. The hollow voice ceased. Your purpose discovered? Asked Anita. What does that mean? Won't you tell us now? Twin queens for your future Mars, and you treat us like children. That light beam he so cleverly planted in Greater New York, Venza hinted. Yes, I will tell you. Without me in New York and my men who went with these Wandlites to Ferrok Shan and Grebhar, the vital gravity beams could never successfully have been planted. The apparatus was complicated. You saw it. You saw the labor I had making the contact? But what are the light beams for? I listened, breathless, as he told them. The electronic beams could not be destroyed. A disintegration of the rock atoms had been set up. With each rotation of the Earth, it was sweeping the sky. From a great control station, Wandl was flinging attraction gravity upon that beam, using it as a monstrous lever upon the rotation of Earth. With every daily passage now, the force was being exerted. The rotation was slowing. In a few days it would stop, with the end of the beam drawn to Wandl and held there. And the beams from Grebhar and Ferrok Shan were the same. 3 giant chains. Then Wandl, traveling of its own gravitational volition, would withdraw from our solar system. The gravitational chains would pull the Earth, Venus, and Mars after it. Titanic tow ropes. The destruction, not of our worlds, but of all life upon them, for the cold of interstellar space would leave no living organism. 3 dead worlds. Wandl would draw them to her own sun and then free them, send them with new orbits around the distant blazing star. 3 new worlds brought home triumphantly by Wandl to join the little family of inhabited planets revolving around this other sun. 3 fair and lovely worlds, warmed back by the other sunlight to be green mansions untenanted, ready to receive the new beings who would come and possess them. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 9. You, Snap. Greg, but how? Hush. They might hear us. They can do more than that. They can almost hear you think. Anita and Venza are here. I know it. I was with them for a time. This accursed gravity. I can't walk. Careful, I whispered. You can crack your head on something with the least false step. Are they taking us ashore? I guess so. How did you happen? Tell you later. They had come for me in that dark pressure port, taken me along a dim corridor of the ship, which evidently had landed a few moments before. Then Snap, with strange figures around him, had been flung at me. These weird beings. The brains were here, but not many. I saw half a dozen on the ship. They could move easily now. They bounced upon their small arms and legs, hitching with little leaps of a few feet. Close at hand they were gruesome. From a distance they had the aspect of 30-inch ovoids, bouncing of their own volition. And I saw too that underneath, toward the back, was a shriveled body. The other figures were wholly different. They seemed at first to be 10-foot upright insects. The 2 legs were like stilts, the body narrow but with bulging chest. The neck was thin, holding the small round head about the size of my own. Words seem futile to picture this thing which was a man of Wandl. There was no skin, but instead what seemed to be a glossy, hard brown shell. It was laid in scales, and upon the legs was a brown fuzz of stiff hair. There were many joints, both of the legs and the torso. Clothing was worn. A single garment, hanging from a wide belt halfway down the legs, seemed incongruous, fantastically aping humanity. This was the worker, equipped by nature for mechanical tasks. There were not 2 arms, but at least 10. From what could have been called the shoulders, they were tentacles, half the length of an elephant's trunk, with many-fingered hands at the ends. From the waist depended huge lobster-like pincers, and from the chest and back the arms were smaller, each with a different type finger claw. The head and face were most of all a personal mocking of mankind. Wide, upstanding, listening ears were upon the sides of the head, one on the forehead and one on the back. The face was mobile, with tiny brown scales, small as a fish. A nose orifice, with 2 protruding brown eyes above it, was set outward on stems, and an up-ended slit of a mouth. There was an eye in the back of the head. Probably, over eons of upward development from what was perhaps an original single type, these 2 specialized forms had developed. The masters, as they were known upon Wandl, neglected the body for the brain, and the workers the reverse. There was no separate individual for the female. As is the case with primitive organisms, they were all bisexual, the parent dying in the reproduction of offspring. Of necessity I have been forced into digression, but at the time Snap and I clung together, whispering, as a group of workers pushed us down a descending incline. Snap, back there in Greater New York when Molo's contact light had burst into existence, had fallen, half unconscious. They picked him up. Molo was going to kill him, but the girls persuaded him to take Snap with them. "Anita and Venza pretended never to have seen me before," Snap whispered to me now. "You take the same line." "If we get with them." "We will." It was weird, this landing upon Wandl. We had left the vessel's side port and were descending what seemed a narrow 100-foot landing incline. We were outdoors, and it was night. Shafts of colored radiance flashed around us. The ship was poised on a disc-like platform with skeleton legs. It seemed 100 feet or more down to the ground level from where the colored lights were darting up. Overhead was a cloudless, purple-red sky of blurred, reddish stars. No doubt the curious atmosphere of Wandl gave the sky and stars this abnormal look. Later, what a multiplicity of obscure wonders we were to glimpse upon Wandl. The slowing rotation of the Earth caused climatic changes there, volcanic and tidal disturbances, but Wandl rotated and stopped at will. Undoubtedly she was equipped to withstand the shock. Her internal fires could not break into eruption. She had very little fluid surface. And the nature of her atmosphere was such that it was not easily disturbed into storms. Only if there was laxity in the handling of the planet's motion would a storm come. But now, questions pounded at me. Earth, Venus, and Mars were to be towed into interstellar space. All life on our worlds would perish in the cold of that stellar journey. Yet Wandl had made that journey. Was her atmosphere inherently such that it did not transmit rays of heat? Snap and I had been pushed down the incline with half a dozen figures in advance of us. Without difficulty we could have leapt down that 100 feet, unaided. Figures were leaping into midair from several pressure ports of the ship. They did not fall, but floated, drifted down. I saw one of the insect-like workers drop with motionless, outstretched arms. Others came mounting up, using their arms and legs with sweeping strokes, as though swimming. It was like being under water. It was a strange, weird scene, the vessel wavering above us, the flashing lights, waving beams of radiance. A fantastic structure nearby reared itself several 100 feet, with lights on top and outlining its many lateral balconies one above the other. The air was full of the leaping, swimming insect-like figures. The brains, the masters, were not in evidence. Then I saw one of them being carried, and others floating down like distended falling balloons to be caught by the workers in small nets and thus saved from jarring contact. Snap was suddenly whispering, "That fellow back of us is our guard. I can feel his ray. Some form of attraction. It's pulling at me." Snap was a little behind me. I turned and saw the faint radiance of a narrow light beam upon him. It came from an instrument in an upper shoulder hand of the insect figure following us, no doubt the reverse form of the same ray which had been used to thrust the wrecked Cometara toward the moon. We reached the bottom. I saw now that the group of workers in advance of us were carrying metal cubes, seemingly of considerable weight. They also had to use the incline. We stood presently on a smooth ground surface. We had not seen Anita and Venza, nor Molo and his sister. The insect figure who was our guard came forward. "You stand here. Molo comes." "Where is he?" I demanded. "I want to see him." I stopped myself quickly. I had very nearly mentioned the girls. "And talk with him." "He comes soon." "I'm hungry." I gestured to my stomach. "Food. You know what that is?" The brown scaly face contorted for a smile, a ghastly grimace. "Yes, you shall have food and drink." It seemed that the hollow voice came not from the neck, but from the shell-like, bulging chest. He stood aside, with the globular weapon of the ray in a pincer hand. We waited, standing gingerly together, wavering with our slight weight. A wind would have blown us away, but there was no wind. Instead, there was a heavy, sultry air, warm as a midsummer Earth night, warmer even than the neo-time of Venus. Snap and I were dressed much the same, wearing heavy boots, for which weight we were thankful, tight, puttee-like trousers flaring at the top, and high-necked white blouses. Both of us were bareheaded. Doubtless we were as fantastic a sight to these Wandlites as they to us. Some of the workers crowded up, reaching out to pluck at us, but Snap waved them away, and our guard dispersed them. One of the master brains came bouncing up. Upon his little upright body the great head wavered. "You will wait here." His eyes glowed up at us. "But listen," Snap began. "You will wait here for the Martian. He has his orders to take you to the great intelligence." The little arm from the side of the head had a hand with a finger pointing for a gesture. "There is a meeting place there. We decided now what to do to destroy the warships of your worlds. I do not like your thoughts. They are black. I will inform the great intelligence when he can spare the thought for you." He added something in the Wandl tongue. A worker came forward, lifted him carefully, held him in the hollow of an encircling tentacle. And with a bound, the worker sailed upward and was gone. Again we stood through an interval. I noticed now that the towering structure near us, with its storied balconies, was not perpendicular. Its front curved up and back. It was convex, somewhat in the fashion of an irregular globe, a 300-foot ball, with a flattened base set here on the ground. The balconies were segments of its front curve. At the top, the roof was as though the ball had been sliced off, like a giant apple with a slice gone for a base and another for the roof. At the bottom was a huge portal with a glow of light from within. And at the terraced balcony levels were lighted windows. "Is that the meeting place?" Snap whispered. "Probably. And look to the side of it, Snap." It was a city. There was a vista of distance to one side of the great globe's structure. Now that our eyes were more accustomed to the queerness of this night upon Wandl, we could ignore the colored light beams of the landing stage and the disembarking palisade upon which we were standing. Gazing into the distance, the curvature of the surface of this little world was immediately apparent. The reddish firmament of stars came down to meet the sharply curving surface at a horizon line which seemed about a mile away. Spread upon this near distance were a variety of structures with little roads of open space winding between them. Most of the buildings seemed globular in shape. Some were small, little round, mound-shaped individual dwellings. Others were larger. Some were tiered like half a dozen apples speared in a row upon a stick and set upright. I saw a ribbon of what might be a river in the distance, with the reddish starlight glinting upon it. To our left, half a mile away perhaps, was a row of buttes and rocks which stood like a miniature range of mountains. The city seemed entirely to encompass them, and every little rock peak had upon its top a globe-like dwelling. Lights were winking everywhere, and figures bounded 100 feet and more, and sailed in an arc, coming down to the ground to bound again. A row of workers went by overhead, not swimming or leaping, but stiffly motionless. Tiny opalescent rays went from them to the ground, as though to give them power. 5 minutes of Earth time might have passed while Snap and I gazed at this busy night scene in this Wandl city upon the occasion of the landing of their ship so triumphantly returned from its mission to Earth. As I stood, certainly a helpless captive if there ever was one, nevertheless a strange sense of my own power was within me. This was so small a world. The people were so flimsy. With a poke of my fist, I could kill any one of these master brains. The 10-foot workers seemed mere shells, light and fragile. Even the buildings were light and flimsy. The little globe houses on their sticks seemed to waver, almost like nodding flowers. If we ran amok, we could smash everything we saw here on Wandl. We became aware of Molo approaching. What a solid giant this 7-foot Martian seemed now in the midst of this buoyant, almost weightless city. He was still bare-headed and wearing his garments of ornamented leather, with his brawny legs bare. Upon his feet were strange-looking, wide-soled shoes. His hands and forearms were thrust into loops of small shields. These shields appeared to be constructed of a heart-shaped flexible framework, covered with an opaque membrane. They were about 2 feet long and half as wide. With a hand and forearm thrust into fabric loops, the shield appeared to serve as wings, so that the arms had more thrust against the air. He came at us with a sort of swimming stroke. He landed somewhat awkwardly, half stumbled and almost fell, but gathered himself up and confronted us. He gained his balance and waved our guard aside. His gaze went to me. "You are the new prisoner taken from that wrecked Earth ship?" "Yes." "What is your name? You are an Earthman, evidently." "Yes." I hesitated. I had seen Molo and heard him talk, back there in Greater New York, but he had not seen me nor heard of me, probably. "Greg Haljan." I added, "I am a skilled navigator. Perhaps it was fortunate you saved me." He flung me a look, and there was a tinge of amusement in it. "You would save your own skin now?" "Why not? You're a Martian, and this is a war also against Mars." His look darkened, but then again sardonic amusement struck him. "We shall see what the Great Master says. There will be a few of our type humans, men and women, wanted when the worlds begin anew. The great master said so. He wants to study life on Earth as it was before the destruction. Molo's glance swept behind us. I turned to see 3 figures approaching. My heart pounded. They were Anita, Venza, and Molo's sister Mika. They came slowly, trying to walk, with balancing outstretched arms. With a dozen curious Wandl workers crowding them, they came and joined Molo before us. My heart was pounding, but I flung them a curious, impersonal stare. "You are here," said Molo. "Good. We go now." He bent over Snap and me. "I advise you to make no effort to leap away, though it may look easy." "Not me," said Snap. "Where would I go alone in this damned world? I can't very well leap back to Earth, can I?" "True enough," said Molo. "You have sense, little fellow. But I just warn you, the guard who will watch you always is very sharp of eye. And the weapons here bring very swift death." I could feel Anita's gaze upon me, but I did not dare look her way. "Let's go," I said. "You will have no trouble with me." With Molo leading us, and the giant insect-like guard following close behind, we made our slow, awkward way across the esplanade portals of the huge globular building. And within, we traversed a cylinder-like padded corridor, and came presently upon the strangest interior scene I had ever beheld. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Wandl the Invader by Ray Cummings. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 10. The room was so large that it seemed almost the entire interior of the building. It was a globular room, 150 feet more in diameter. The inner surface was crowded with people. It was a huge, hollow interior of a ball, and upon its concave surface a throng of the brown-shelled workers were gathered. They sat on low seats at the curved bottom of the room, where we entered, and up the sides and upon the slopes and the top, like flies in a globe, hanging head downward. There was no up or down here. The slight gravity made little difference. I gazed up amazed to where, 150 feet above me, head downward, the crowd of figures were calmly seated. These were clinging, of course. The pound weight of each of them would drop them down if they let loose, but it required only a slight effort. Between the tiers, there were narrow open aisles bearing glow lights at intervals. With Molo leading us, we stared up the curving incline of one of these aisles. "Greg, good Lord, it's weird," Snap said. "Where are we going to sit? Don't speak to the girls yet." "Have you spoken to them?" "Yes, a little, on the ship. They're watching for an opportunity, but we have to be cautious. Greg, I've got so much to tell you, but no chance. The brains can just about hear your thoughts." We went only a short distance up the incline. There were vacant seats seemingly held ready for us. Our passage created a commotion among the figures. Some leaped up and over us to get a better look. I found that we were clinging to the mound-like convex surface of a small half-globe. It raised us some 10 feet above the floor. There were low seats with arms against the side pull of gravity. I found Anita close beside me. Her hand touched me, but she did not turn her head or speak. Molo was on my other side. I chanced to see his feet. They were planted firmly on the floor. He wore wide-soled shoes equipped with suction pads, no doubt, which would enable him, like the Wandlites, to walk and stand upon the upper inner surfaces of buildings. As during the moments when Snap and I stood on the landing esplanade, There was so much here that at first I could not encompass it, but now I began to grasp other details of the strange scene. Poised in midair, almost exactly in the center of the huge globular room, was a metal globe of some 30 feet in diameter. It was held, not by any solid girders, but by 4 narrow beams of light which mounted to it from widespread points of the convex room. Upon the entire surface of this 30-foot globe, a group of masters were seated, in little, cup-like seats upon resilient stems. They swayed and nodded with movement. There seemed to be glowing wires and grids and thread-like beams of light carrying current. Light threads shot from the mechanisms to the heads of the seated brains. All the devices were evidently in operation, and upon this poised central globe the attention of the audience was directed. Paulo bent over me. "The great intelligence soon will see you." Snap, from the other side of Paulo, whispered, "What are they doing up there?" The faint hiss and throb of the devices were audible. I stared, trying to understand. Images and sounds, invisible and inaudible, were being received from across the millions of miles of space, and they were being transmuted within the brains themselves. I saw that discs were fastened upon the bulging foreheads of the brains, upon which the tiny light beams carrying the vibrations impinged. These brains, receiving waves of some unknown variety, were, within the mechanism of the brain cell, translating the vibrations into things knowable. They were not seeing, not hearing, but knowing what went on millions of miles across space. Again Paulo bent over me. "They are about to show this audience what is happening on the 3 worlds." Upon the 30-foot globe I saw now a dozen or so balls of about 3-foot diameter. These had been dark and I had not noticed them. Now they began glowing, not from wires carrying the current, but from the little hands of the brains touching them. I stared at the brain nearest me. His flabby little arm was extended. His hand touched the image ball, gave it light and color, like a fortune-teller of Earth with the crystal before her. Even though I was some 60 feet from it, I could see the moving images clearly and recognized the scene. The Tappan interplanetary stage. Ships were rising, 2 of our spaceships mounting. And all in an instant the scene blurred, took form again. The red-green spires and minarets of Ferrok Shan. The central canal extended like a gash across the foreground. The mushroom mountains were in a line upon the horizon. 3 Martian space flyers slid up while we watched. And now Grebhar. The silver forest in all its shining beauty, where Venza was born. The sunlight sparkled on the river. A spaceship was rising in the distant sky over the shining forest. Beyond Anita, I heard Venza murmuring, "Home, if only we were there." I could feel Anita move to silence her. Paulo was whispering, "They come, but we will be ready for them." Another image, mid-space. The Allied ships gathering, waiting for others to arrive. A group here of about 10 of our ships from the 3 worlds, poised, waiting. I was aware that upon the mound-like protuberance of the room floor where we were sitting, a door was opening. It slid, or melted away. At our feet was an opening downward into the small interior of the mound. Paulo whispered, "The Great Master. Sit quiet. He will talk to us." Over us now a barrage came with a hiss, a circular curtain of insulation. The huge globular room faded. We were alone on the mound, Snap, Paulo, myself, Anita, Venza, and Mika upon the end of our bench. Behind us stood our single Wandlite guard, with a weapon in his shoulder hand. At our feet an opening yawned into the mound interior. It was a tiny, lighted room. In a cup-like seat a brain was perched, just below the level of our feet, the great master brain of Wandl. He was alone here, not attended by retinue, no pomp and ceremony to usher us into his presence, no underlings obsequiously bowing to mark him for a great ruler. We stared down, and the great brain stared up at us, seemingly equally curious. His head was a full 4 feet in diameter. The little body sat in the cup with dangling legs. The clothes were ornamented. There was a glowing device on the chest. He spoke with a measured rumble in Martian. "You are Molo of Ferric Shan." "Yes," said Molo. "You must say, 'Yes, great master.'" "Yes, great master." "I know about you. I know that we trust you." The huge round eyes next fastened upon me, then to Snap, and back to me. The words were English this time. "Men of Earth, are you decided, like the Martian, to join with us?" I tried with sudden vehemence to still my thoughts, or to change them so that they lied. Fear surged upon me. Could this vast mechanism of human mind here at my feet interpret the vibrations of my thoughts? Could this great master of Wandl see into my mind? The brain said, "You are uncertain. You do not want to die?" "No, great master," we both answered. "You shall not, unless you attempt to cause us trouble. Your thoughts are black." He addressed Molo. "Have they ever been read?" "No, great master." "When opportunity comes, have them read." He added to Snap and me, "I plan to take prisoners. My supreme rulers of a neighboring more powerful planet, which sent Wandl upon her mission of conquest, ordered it. When your worlds are vacant of life, those who command me will want some of you left alive to be studied. Your thoughts are very black, Earthman. I think when they are carefully read, you will prove no great advantage to us." There was irony in the voice, and upon the monstrous bulging face came the horrible travesty of a grin. The grin on the brain's face faded. His interest went again to Molo. "That is your sister." The eyes swung to Mika and back. "Yes, great master." "She is caring for this Earth girl and this girl from Venus?" "Yes, great master. I am fond of them. I have plans." "They are in your charge, Martian. I will not interfere with you. But guard them well. I trust you and your sister. These others—" "The Earth and the Venus girl can be of help to me, great master." "How?" "They knew young men who were in the spaceship service. They can tell me the armament of men and weapons on most of the spaceships which Earth will send against us." Did Molo really believe that? Probably not, but he wanted the girls with him. Again came that grotesque smile. "Let them not bother you, Martian. You have work to do. Listen carefully. There will be a battle. Earth, Mars, and Venus may perhaps have 100 ships. I cannot bring destruction upon those 3 worlds in a day. We soon will make contact with the light beam you placed on Earth. That I will show you. But the rotation cannot be stopped at once. It will take time. The enemy ships might dare to come to Wandl. But I shall not wait for that. All my spaceships are very nearly ready. If there is to be a battle, it shall be far from here, in the neighborhood of the enemy worlds. We are at this time about 62 million of your miles from the Earth, a third less than that from Mars, and about a third more from Venus. I understand, Martian, that you are skilled in space warfare. The brain went on, I have given you a vessel to command. You will be surprised to know its name, the Star Streak. Mika gasped, But you destroyed it, Great Master. Only wrecked it, Martian girl. It is repaired now. You, Molo, and your sister to help you, who could command it to more advantage? All your own weapons and ours of Wandl have been added. You may select your crew. Is it to your liking? Yes, Great Master. You will be housed in this city, War, in the dwelling globe you occupied before. Keep your prisoners with you, if you like. These two Earthmen, began Molo, but he was interrupted. Settle that later. I do not want the annoyance. I was dimly conscious of a great clanging coming through the curtain of barrage which was over us. The brain added, Keep Wick with you to guard the prisoners. He will also attend your needs. In the battle, Martian, I expect great things of you and your Star Streak. Great Master, you will not be disappointed. And prisoners, but not too many. Bring me a few young specimens like these, representative of Venus, Mars, and the Earth. I want both of the sexes, an equal number of each. Yes, Great Master. The warning signal is coming. You will now see our first contact. The light at our feet was fading. It clung last by the gruesome face of the huge brain. The goggling eyes shone green, and as the light in the little mound room dimmed, there was in a moment nothing left but those lurid green pools of the brain's eyes. Then I was aware that the aperture at our feet had closed. Over us, the barrage curtain was dissipating, sight and sound coming into us. The huge ball-shaped conclave room again became visible, the audience crowding its entire inner surface. I suddenly felt Anita's fingers twitching at my sleeve. Greg, darling, can you hear me? Yes. Be careful. But Molo was gazing up over our heads. The crowd was shifting, bending so that they all seemed gazing at their feet. A dim white radiance, seeming to come from down here somewhere near us, lay in a splotch on a segment of the throng overhead. Molo was watching. I whispered, All right, Anita. Quick, what is it? The great control station is not far from here. Venza and I have been trying to find out where it is exactly. She stopped, evidently fearful of Mika. Then she added, Greg, we haven't been guarded very closely. They're not suspicious of us. Later, Anita. Can't talk now. No. Watch our chance. Later. I turned toward Molo. What's that up there? The transparent ray is opening the top of the globe. The clanging signal gong had stilled. The audience was hushed and expectant. The white patch of light overhead spread until it encompassed all the top of the globe. The whole area was glowing. The people were white, spectral shapes, transparent. And the top of the globe was transparent. I saw the night sky, with the gleaming reddish stars. It was, in a moment, as though we were staring up at a huge square window orifice cut in the top of the room. A broad vista of cloudless sky and stars was visible. Across it, like a shining sword, was a narrow opalescent beam. "The Earth beam which I planted," Molo whispered triumphantly. "Our control station will contact with it now. The first contact." Earth was below our angle of vision, but the beam from Greater New York, sweeping the sky with the Earth's rotation, was passing now comparatively close to Wandl. There was an expectant moment. Then into the sky leaped another ray, narrow, luridly green. It swung up from Wandl and darted into space. The hissing, agonized electrical scream from it as it burst through the Wandl atmosphere was deafening. I saw it strike the Earth beam, grip it with a blinding burst of radiance up there in the sky, clinging, pulling against the rotation of the Earth with a lever 60 million miles long. A moment of screaming sound in the atmosphere around us, and that conflict of light in the sky. Then the screaming suddenly stilled. The Wandl beam vanished. The Earth beam still swept the heavens like a stiff, upstanding sword. But in that moment when Wandl gripped it, the axis of the Earth had been changed a little. The rotation was slowed. By a few minutes, the day and the night on Earth were lengthened. It was the beginning of Earth's desolation. End of chapter 10.